Good evening all and welcome to tonight's mega compilation of scary stories in the rain. Don't forget to subscribe for more new stories every week and check out our app with over 5,000 stories and no ads. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I worked overnight security in one of the largest, best, and oldest hospitals in the US. My fellow security officers and I all have stories about one building in particular, but the one that I'll tell is the one that happened to me. It was built in the late 1800s. It was the original psychiatric building for the hospital. Now, being the late 1800s, not much was truly known about psychiatric disorders. On top of that, this hospital was known for its medical research. With both of these facts combined, you can infer that some terrible stuff was done of these misunderstood psych patients in the building. A few years before I started working security there, this building had been converted into offices after the newly built part of the hospital dedicated a section for an updated psych ward. My rounds for that night happened to include said building. At night, this building was empty due to recently being converted into offices, and the drones who worked there wanting to leave promptly at 5, if not earlier, in some of their haste. They left their office doors unlocked, which is a big no-no due to medical information being located within them. It was our duty to go to each floor and make sure every door was locked, and if it wasn't, to secure it ourselves. I did my initial sweep of the building to make sure it was clear, and there was nobody in there, and proceeded to do my door checks. The hallways were pretty narrow, so I could check both sides of the hallway doors at once. At the end of this hallway, there were 2 sets of doors you had to go through to reach the final office, which was a dead end. Everything was secure. Awesome, time for the next floor. I exited the 2 sets of doors from the dead end office and stood absolutely frozen from what I saw. Every door ajar, set perfectly, so their own weight wouldn't cause them to shut again, and one wheelchair at the end of said hallway facing towards the step. I had heard other security officers outright reject that set of rounds due to strange stuff happening there, but I laughed it off until that night happened. I never took those rounds again. The older children's ICU is currently under construction to be turned into medical labs, so we have to patrol the area, once again, to make sure the area is secure or to report if the contractor/foreman stayed to plan for the next day. While patrolling this area, several security officers have reported seeing a single white male child between the ages of 5 and 7, sporting short brown hair. Imagine a 90s bowl cut. I personally dismissed this, as this was before the psych ward incident, as a tall tale told with the intent to scare me because I was new at the time. I got to that building patrol one night, and a foreman who stayed late called security and asked for a security officer to come up because a kid had locked himself in a room and he didn't want him to get hurt with all the open wires, or something to that effect. I unlocked the door for him, looked in what can only be described as a 10 by 8 room for about 10 minutes, and there was no kid. Called it a false alarm and finished my patrol. I also had a special detail, aka babysitting a violent psych patient, along with another security officer. He woke up in the middle of the night, recognized the other officer and said hello. He sees me and immediately starts screaming at me not to hurt him. Now, I'm a rather large gentleman, standing at 6'2" and weighing 250 pounds. But I try not to make myself too intimidating around psych patients, as to not escalate the situation. Well, he keeps screaming for me not to hurt him, and he says if I promise not to, he would make something good happen to me. He promised. He calms down and goes back to sleep and I forget about it. Next day I got a permanent set of rounds and a pretty good promotion. Easily coincidence, but interesting nonetheless. This is my final encounter. A fellow security officer had rounds in the aforementioned psych building. Heard a call on the radio in what could only be described as dry throat of terror voice for one officer for backup. I was nearby, so responded to his call letting him know that I was on his way. When I got there, he had his head between his knees and was silently crying, with a shattered chandelier a few feet from him. Now, before I had experienced the abnormal happenings in this building, I would have written off his testimony as idiocy, but he claimed that something held him in that spot as the chandelier started swinging violently until it began to fall. When it started to fall, he was let go and allowed to move, and scrambled out of the way before it crushed him. I got him up, calmed him down, and took him back to the supervisor. She yelled to one of our other supervisors, "Oi, Darren, I almost lost another one in that building." The other supervisor laughed and said, "Why do you think we always send the new guys? You know I don't even like going there." That guy is my roommate, and he hates it when I bring up that experience. I worked at a hospital, doing transport for a few years. The transport home base was in the basement of the hospital, where all the laundry is done and supplies are also sorted there. I hated working late nights after this incident. On this particular night, I was the only one in the basement when I heard whistling at the end of the hallway by the elevator. I poked my head around the corner, expecting to see my only co-worker on duty that night, but there was absolutely no one there. I shrugged it off. I'm not easily spooked. Nights are slow, so I ate some snacks and hung out in the break room for a bit. Next thing I know, I hear a loud bang. I walked into the hallway, and a bed is rolling down the hall, bumping into the sides. At this point, I just think my co-worker's messing with me. I radio him and he says he's upstairs in the cafeteria. I still don't believe him, and I'll catch him in the act. I walk past the laundry room, and the machines start. I pop my head in and expect him to find him there, but it's completely empty. Okay, starting to get a little nervous. I walk into the laundry room, and the machines completely stop. I freeze, then run out and head towards the elevator, when I hear whistling again. At this point I know I'm the only worker in the basement. As I'm standing there waiting for the elevator, things start falling off the shelves down the hall. Boxes of gloves, tissues, packets of tubes. I'm literally standing there watching them fall off one by one at the opposite end of the hallway, and I kid you not, my entire body broke out in goosebumps. My hair stood on end, and I had this strong gut feeling of being watched. I was not alone. As I'm getting onto the elevator, I feel what felt like someone brushing my arm. I went upstairs and found my co-worker in the cafeteria, freaked out to him and got the hell out of there and transferred soon after. The creepy thing to add is that while I usually whistle mindlessly to myself while working, it was almost like the spirit was mocking me. Creepiest feeling ever. I work as a teletech while I'm in school, and when the unit secretary leaves for lunch, I will cover the desk for the time being, since it's right outside the tele room. I was sorting the heart rhythm strips and someone walks up to the desk and said he was looking for the exit. I pointed in the direction right as I looked up to acknowledge him standing there and saw he was in a gown with a wristband. So I asked him his room number and to wait while I called his PCA to walk with him downstairs. I called the PCA and gave her the room number. She told me, "That can't be the right room. The patient died about 20 minutes ago. Was it his family?" I told her he had a wristband on, or maybe I had heard or was given the wrong room number. She came to the desk to cover the monitors for me, and I went to peek in the room he told me to see if it was the wrong room and find out which room he was in. Sure enough, laying dead in the bed was the same guy who walked up to the desk no longer than 10 minutes before I went in there. This is a story told to me by my uncle, who was in his 60s, and I will be telling it from his perspective. This happened in the late 80s. In these times, or rather this decade, I was a heavy home hopper. I could not stay home for more than 5 to 6 months. In what I believe to be 1987, I moved into my first house after having many apartments beforehand. But that's just too little background for the story. So now I will tell you the story of one life-changing experience that still gives me nightmares. It was late evening and I had just got back from a walk that I would usually take to help keep my mind clear. I forgot what time it was, but I'm going to estimate somewhere after 9, because I had to be up the next morning for work. So I took a shower, hopped out, got dressed, and then went back to bed, which was probably around 10 now. I woke up at 4 in the morning to a window clash. I jumped straight up, half asleep and half awake. Was it just my dream that scared me into think a glass broke? I asked myself this, but then I heard footsteps. After hearing this, I jumped right into action, shut my door and dialed the cops from the house phone that I had in my room. When they picked up, I whispered that there was a robbery going on in my home. They told me to get inside a locked room, make no sound until they could arrive. I whispered back that I'm in a locked room and to please hurry, and they assured me that there were 2 cars on their way to my house immediately. Still feeling no help, I whispered okay, then hung up the phone shaking. I told myself it was going to be alright, and whoever was down there wasn't going to know I was there, or if they did, they weren't going to be able to get in because the door was locked. Boy, was I wrong. 2 minutes later, after telling myself this, I saw the door rattle. I was way more shaken and in fear now, but I remember again that the door was locked. But then the door opened, like it was never locked. Who had slid into my room was the intruder, and he made eye contact with me as soon as he stepped in. I now froze. I just stared as he walked closer with a firearm now pointed at me. He told me to get off the floor and told me to get into the closet. He then asked me to sit down. I did what he was asking me, on my knees looking straight at him. I told him in a really shaken voice, "My wallet and everything is on the bed, and my keys are in the coat pocket on my dresser." He replied that he didn't care for my belongings, and that he came for my life. Then he began to raise the weapon to my face. At this point I knew there was no tomorrow for me, or the next day, or any other day after that. I just closed my eyes to stop myself from looking at his pistol. There wasn't any fighting back either, because he was a little bit distant from me, so I knew I would be killed immediately. So I just sat there in shock, life flashing before my eyes, thinking about the last conversation I'd had with my mum, dad, and 3 siblings. I sat there with my eyes closed, thinking of all of this in the matter of seconds until I heard sirens outside. Hearing this, I opened my eyes, expecting the intruder to still be there, but no one at all. I still sat there frozen, thinking to myself, he's got to be lurking somewhere in the room, because I haven't heard any footsteps leave the room. I sat in the same spot until the cops came in. They asked if it was me who had called the operator, and I said yes. I felt relief knowing that I was just in real danger and seconds away from losing my life, yet I had not. The cop asked me if I heard the door or window shut before they came in, and I shook my head no, telling them that I was face to face with the man in my room seconds before they came in, and that I didn't hear anyone leave. They took my statement, and after checking the house, they came back to tell me there was no trace of a forced break-in or a broken glass or anything. Kind of shaken by the incident that took place in my room, I began to get more weirded and more shaken. What the hell just happened, I asked myself. I know I heard the window break, which had awoken me from my sleep. After this part, there is kind of a blur, but I remember going downstairs and being in the living room. The cops had just left, and there was no way I was staying in the house after what had just happened. So I left not long after the cops did, leaving almost every light in the house on. I was horrified, but there was no way I hallucinated it. I asked myself if it could have been in my head, but I knew it wasn't. I remember going to my parents' house and taking a shower, and getting ready for work at that point since it was now 5 leading into 6, and I had to be in at 6:30. I knew I was going to be late that day, but told myself I would give them a good explanation. My house was nearly robbed? Only if that part alone was true, I wouldn't be telling them that. But I was so freaked out that I didn't bother to tell them the truth. But anyway, skip this part, fast forward 2 weeks later, and I'm still at my parents' house deciding if I want to go back or just call the lawyer and tell him it was nice having this first house, but I found something bigger and better. I was leaning more on moving out. During the whole week deciding period, I would go home to grab some of my essentials that I needed for work and stuff. I remember right before coming out, hearing a knock on the door. I was on my way out, so I approached the door and saw an older man who appeared to be in his late 40s. "Hello, sir. Is there anything I can help you with?" I asked. He introduced himself as Bennett, and tells me he's my next-door neighbor and hasn't had a good chance to introduce himself yet. He asked me if I was alright, because he saw I had called the cops the other day. "Yeah, it's just a misunderstanding. I kinda thought my house got broken into, which is what woke me up. Seemed it was just a hallucination or a trick," I said, half chuckling, while replying to him. "Yeah," he started saying. "You know, there's something I wanted to tell you. It's about your home. Back in the late 60s, there was another guy who lived there. One day there was a late robbery around 3 to 4 a.m. He was in his room, which happened to be the same room as mine. When I guessed he heard broken glass, because the window was broken, assuming the intruder had broken in through that way. He called the cops. They came in a heartbeat, but right as they were walking in, they heard gunshots. When they went up to the man's room, they saw the intruder. He tried to have a standoff with the cops, but it ended up with him being shot twice and dying before the ambulance even got there. He said the man who was being robbed was shot twice by the invader, but was only hit in his chest and shoulder, and he survived. After hearing the story, it made me sick to my stomach. This told me everything I had witnessed that night, and the day right after. I negotiated with my landlord to break lease early, since I'd only lived there under a year, and explained to him about the robbery and what had happened, but just the robbery part. The what I want to call paranormal was up to him and the next renter now. My wife and I used to work at a relatively small office together when we were fresh out of college. We were friends with several of our co-workers, but they were more like work friends, not really people you would hang out with outside of work. That is until we began speaking with George, who was cousins with the owner of the company. He was in his mid-40s, pretty dorky and heavy-set, and made the corniest jokes. We both found him sort of endearing. One day he tells us he used to be an extra in several movies back in the 90s, and that one of those movies was streaming on Netflix. I actually thought this was really interesting, and I don't remember exactly how the rest of the conversation went, but my wife and I ended up extending an invitation for him to come over for dinner and have a screening of the movie he was in. Several weeks later, I think it was a Friday, he arrives around dinner time with a few pints of ice cream. We were excited to have him over, as my wife and I like to entertain guests, but don't have many opportunities to do so. Within only a few minutes of arriving, he asks where the bathroom is. We lived in a small apartment at the time, so I was able to just point to the bathroom door from where I was sitting, and told him to feel free to use it whenever he needed to do so. He said, "No, that's okay, I can hold it in." I remember feeling bad because the last thing I wanted was for a guest of ours to feel uncomfortable, especially so early into the evening. I shrugged it off and we had dinner, put the dishes in the sink and poured a few more glasses of wine. As we were queuing up the movie, George asked if either of us had to use the bathroom. That's weird, I was thinking. Why would he ask if we needed to use it? I thought maybe he felt weird, if he was the only one who had to go, but in my mind it didn't make sense. We said no, and carried on with the movie. Turns out the film was very low budget, and I think we ended up just fast forwarding to the part he was in, putting something else on, and continuing to pour the wine. After a while longer, he finally gets up and goes into the bathroom. While he's in there, my wife and I begin cleaning up, doing the dishes, and start doing the wind down for the night. Several minutes passed with George still in the bathroom, so I whispered to my wife, "I wonder what's taking him so long. Surely he's not doing anything more than a quick piss, right?" After about 5 minutes, George eventually comes out of the bathroom and sits down on the couch as we continue to clean up. At this point in the night, both my wife and I actually do need to use the bathroom, probably from all the wine we've been drinking. On a side note, my wife is a very attractive woman, about 5'10", slender blonde, who looks like she stepped out of a Victoria's Secret magazine. And she tends to get a lot of attention from guys whenever we go out, and always has her guard up, especially when she's around strangers. As a result, she's developed a pretty keen sense when something doesn't seem right, or when someone turns on their creep factor. My wife heads into the bathroom, does her thing, and comes back to the kitchen. We walk past each other as I head to the bathroom. As I'm going in, I hear my wife tell George that he left his watch in the bathroom. George goes, "Oh, I must have forgotten it when I took it off to wash my hands." I look in the bathroom and see the watch still sitting on the top of the toilet tank. I hand it to George, and this was strange in itself for two reasons. Who takes their watch off when they're washing their hands? And two, our bathroom had plenty of counter space. Why would he need to put it on top of the toilet tank? I tried not to think anything of it, probably because I was so tipsy from the wine. 5 minutes later, George says he's going to call it a night, so we say goodnight and he heads home. As my wife and I are getting ready for bed, we discuss how nice it was to have George over, and that we need to have guests over more often. She then turns to me and says, "I feel bad saying this, but I had a really creepy thought about George." I asked her what it was. "Well, when I walked into the bathroom and saw his watch, I had this creepy feeling about it. I noticed the face of the watch facing forwards, so my gut told me to flip the watch facing up towards the ceiling before using the toilet." We both laughed at the idea as it seemed so outrageous. But as we began to think about how the night played out, all the weird questions about if we needed to use the bathroom, and the placement of the watch, we started to really think maybe it wasn't such a crazy idea after all. We sat there for a good 5 to 10 minutes trying to come up with logical explanations for everything that happened. Suddenly, a thought popped into my head, and I remembered my father several Christmases before gave me a spy watch as a present. I have no idea why he gave it to me. I never asked for it, I never really used it, but I was pretty sure I still had it somewhere deep in my closet. I immediately went digging for it, found it, opened the box, and almost fell over backwards when I saw it. It was the exact same watch that George had. At that point we knew it wasn't just an unfortunate coincidence, nor our imaginations running wild. We could not believe it, and were so creeped out, feeling like we'd been violated in our own home. We talked about how we wanted to address this unsettling situation, but ultimately decided to keep it to ourselves and ignore him going forward, as we would not risk losing our jobs for accusations with no evidence. After all, his cousin was the owner of the company. About a week goes by and I see George at work only once. He stepped by my cube to thank me again for having him over for dinner. Trying not to punch him square in the mouth, I avoided eye contact and said, "Sure," in a tone that said, "I know what you tried to do to my wife, you perverted son of a gun." About exactly a week after the incident, my wife and I were out to dinner with my parents, and we told them what happened. My mum asked if we had Googled his name to see if maybe he had any arrest records. I had no idea why this didn't come into our minds sooner, but right then and there we Googled his name. Wouldn't you know, one of the first links that pops up was an arrest records page. I clicked into it and saw his mugshot, only it wasn't the dorky looking guy we were used to seeing around the office. In the photo, he had greasy, disheveled hair, and the look on his face that he was wearing could kill. There was only one felony on his record, Peeping Tom. This made the experience all the more surreal and frightening. The fact that we had a felon in our apartment with a history of creeping on women made us question our judgment in people, and ultimately created a level of distrust of anyone outside our immediate family and best friends. In the end, we continued to ignore George at the office until a few months later when my wife and I were both able to find new companies to work for. Eventually, we did report him to the police and called the elementary school across the office, just to make them aware of his record. In the end, I'm just thankful that my wife trusted her gut instinct enough to flip the watch facing upwards. There really are some perverted people out there, so please always listen to your gut whenever something doesn't feel right. And George, if you're out there, listening to this, hope we never meet again. I was in the orthopedic surgery wing of the hospital after getting my torn Achilles tendon repaired. It was a fairly long procedure, and I was pretty groggy from the anesthesia after effects combined with the morphine for the pain. But I did notice that I had a roommate that had both of his hands and feet wrapped in bandages. I could hear him talking to his father, but didn't pay much attention because of how out of it I was at the time. I did remember hearing something about, "Why did you stop taking your medication?" I don't know how morphine affects anyone else, but it gives me a very restless sleep combined with vivid dreams, almost nightmares, something I've never had. So in the middle of the night, while turning over for the 1000th time, I spied someone standing beside my bed in the dark. "Got any smokes?" My roommate apparently was standing there watching me sleep, waiting for me to wake up to ask for cigarettes. It could be considered very polite or very creepy, but when you are in a morphine-induced haze, it was definitely creepy. Later that day, I heard the details of why he was there. He had gone off his meds and decided to quit smoking hardcore. I mean liquid nitrogen cold turkey. First, he nailed his feet to the floor so he couldn't go out for smokes. Then, he took a butcher's knife from the kitchen and cut off the fingers of his left hand so that he couldn't hold the cigarette. That's where his plan kind of fell apart, because he had a lot of trouble cutting off the right fingers with no left fingers to hold the knife. He only got through 3 of them. I put this together between the conversations I overheard between family, nurses, and doctors. I was supposed to be in there for another day, but they told me I could go home early if I was okay with taking Tylenol 3 for the pain. I would have to stay if I needed the stronger morphine painkiller, so the staff could administer it. I said I would go home with aspirin if it meant getting out of that room. The head nurse at the nursing station was sympathetic and said the guy really needed to be put in a different kind of hospital. But he had orthopedic issues that had to be dealt with, and that's why he was there. It wasn't supernatural, just a mentally disturbed individual who had hurt himself. He probably couldn't even have hurt anyone else considering his injuries. But in my morphine fog, it was creepy as hell to have someone that disturbed 10 feet away while I was sleeping. When I was in college, my ex-boyfriend, who I was making moves towards getting back together with and still ran in the same social circles with, died suddenly. Apparently he was sick and I had no idea. No one knew a thing. Of all our mutual friends, a guy I barely knew was the one who called me and told me he was in a coma. Then later that night I found out he died. His best friend came over to my apartment unannounced the next day, but did not bring it up until I finally couldn't hold it in anymore and said, "So did you hear about?" She said, "Yeah, of course," and changed the subject. I was still completely shell-shocked. She seemed a little down, not like her lifelong best friend just dropped dead out of the blue the night before. I went to the funeral, and most of our friends weren't there. Nowhere near the number of people you'd expect at a healthy young man's funeral. Of who was there, no one seemed really upset but me. I know everyone grieves differently, But even his family weren't particularly dressed up or devastated. His younger sisters were giggling with each other the whole time. Weirdest of all was the people I spoke with. No one really seemed clear exactly on what sudden illness he died of. I'd like to have seen him one last time, but it was closed casket. I'm 99% sure he's really dead, but the circumstances surrounding it were so abrupt and strange that I sometimes wonder if he really faked everything to perfection. Just so you know, he really didn't want to get back together. You guys are about 8 years late on that joke I made at the funeral. We dated seriously for several months. He dumped me, then several months later wanted to get back together. I said I wanted to think about it, and he died. The end. Now, he wasn't into drugs or gambling or anything like that. Not that I know of. He had a history of depression. I may consider getting a death certificate, although I may have trouble explaining that to my husband. I work the evening shift at a hospital that is believed to be, at least by 90% of the staff, haunted. I'm part of the 90%. You see, there have been horror stories about every building, floor, and pretty much every part of the campus. I mostly wander around alone as a housekeeper, and that makes it much worse. At least when my mind is on it. Usually I try not to think about it. My personal experience was back in the ultrasound wing of the radiology clinic. By the time I get around to that area, the lights automatically dim, and there isn't anything I can do about it. It's always spooky back there at night, so I usually just get done with what I need to do and move on. The place is kind of shaped like a J, like a long hallway that curves around. On the inner side of the curve, there's a dressing room that opens up to a mammography suite, and then opens again at the top of the J. If you're standing at the bottom of the J, you can see through the doors of both rooms to the top of the J. I was standing back there, trying to bag on my card, when something moved in the corner of my eye. I looked up, and through the dressing and mammo rooms, to the other doorway opposite me. I vividly remember it like it was yesterday. A male figure walks past the door right before my eyes. I literally watched it amble slowly across my field of vision. There are no male ultrasound techs here, and it was not my boss. It looked like it was wearing dark clothing, had long hair, but was definitely male. I snapped out of it and ran over to see if some freak had wandered in, but there wasn't anyone. I grabbed my stuff and ran out without finishing all the work, 'cause screw that. Another story, which isn't my personal experience, comes from the second floor of the hospital. The second floor has nothing but offices and computer labs, all adjacent to one corridor that spans the entire length of the building. On one end is a set of elevators, and on the other, a pair of double doors that opens into a computer lab. This floor is infamous for being the domain of something the workers affectionately call Matilda. The first story I heard about her was from a co-worker who knew someone who worked on that floor. He came in for whatever reason doing office stuff and was going home late one night. He walks out of the office and starts towards the elevators when something catches his eye, so he turned towards the computer lab. At the end of the hallway, there was what looked like a patient peeking into the lab. He walks towards her and asks her who she is and what floor she came from. She turns around, and she has no face. The office guy is frozen in place, scared out of his mind. He wants to run away, but he doesn't want to turn his attention away from whoever or whatever is staring him down at the other end of the hall. What does he do instead? He closes his eyes as tight as he can, and after several seconds or minutes or however long it was, he opens them, and she's gone. He says he's never ran as fast in his life as he did that night, straight outside without ever looking back. Another Matilda happening was when one of the managers left a tape recorder going in his office, also on the second floor, because he wanted to see if he could catch any weird noises or voices. The next day I'm walking by his office with a co-worker, and he calls us in there and plays the recording to see if we hear it. After forever with nothing, a faint voice comes in and says, "Turn it off." That was spooky as hell. I've got another story. I'm in the MRI suite right now where my friend, Sandra, told me she had a scary experience. Like the ultrasound area, MRI can sometimes give off a creepy vibe. I've never seen anything back here personally, but Sandra has. She told me about a time where she had come in late one night to prep the MRI. The suite is shaped like a W, with the middle wedge representing the computer workstation and the outer ones being the MRI rooms themselves. On opposite sides of the workstation, there are windows looking into the rooms, and you can see the reflection of the window behind you in the one in front of you. She was back here alone that night, prepping the machine and half asleep. It began to dawn on her that something felt wrong, and she began to experience a feeling of dread. Whatever it was made her feel so uncomfortable and restless that she snapped out of it and woke up. She looks up into the window, into the suite, and sees a silhouette of a figure standing in the corner. She doesn't know what the hell it is. Thinking, she sees things, but remembers how I said you can see the reflection of one window in that other? She realizes that the figure isn't standing in the corner of that room, but is rather standing in front of the other window behind her, just staring at her. This happened a few days ago, and it was a very good lesson for me to always take some sort of protection, even if you're only going out for a small amount of time. I normally take this loud alarm with me when I go for walks or out and about by myself, but typically, it's at night time when I do this, as I'm quite a night owl. However, this day, it was still light out, and I was only going up the street to deposit some money in the bank, and I figured I'd be fine without an alarm. Due to living in a somewhat high-crime area, I typically message my mum or a close pal about where I'm going to, and when to expect a message back from me upon my return, just to be on the safe side. I also now give them a description of what I'll be wearing just to be extra careful. However, this day I was really tired, and just frankly wanted to go to the bank and get home. So I quickly texted my mum and took off. Behind the apartment complex where I live is a short road that leads to my bank. This is the shortcut way. The sidewalk leading to it is next to a few other buildings on either side, but each building is just the back entrance with no windows. In other words, it's not exactly the safest route, because if anyone wanted to try and jump you, no one would really be able to see anything unless they were a pedestrian or driving by. Nonetheless, I took the route anyway. As I was walking, the road stretches to the main street, and if you keep walking/driving on it, it also leads to the back parking lot of the bank. As I was walking, I saw a white car driving down and making a turn into the parking lot. The driver kept staring at me, and had slowed down significantly as he was staring and driving to the bank. I didn't think much of it at first. I had taken no effort in my appearance, no makeup, having messy hair, and shabby house clothes, so I couldn't imagine anyone would find me attractive that day. But I guess I was wrong. I made my way up to the ATM lobby. The bank itself was closed, but had the little vestibule open where there were 2 ATMs. As I approached the door, I noticed the man's car was parked in front of it and still running, so I figured it was cool. He must be in a hurry if he left his car running. I don't like being the only person in an ATM vestibule with strangers, so I took my sweet time walking to the entrance, hoping he would be finished before I got to the lobby. When I entered, the man was staring at me again, and I noticed from the corner of my eye that he was still looking at me while I was doing my thing. However, to my relief, he left shortly after I got in, because the ATM kept rejecting one of my bills due to it being wrinkly, and I honestly just wanted to make sure that he wasn't there when I left, so made an effort in being slow.
After finally getting the machine to accept my bills, I took my card and proceeded to leave. The door of the lobby is tinted glass, so you can clearly see what's outside. As I headed to the door, my stomach dropped. There was the man still in his car, hand on the steering wheel, staring directly into the door of the lobby. I muttered to myself, no one else was there, and no one else was around, so it's not like he was waiting for someone else to exit but me. Why would he be sitting in his car for well over 5 minutes, just staring at the door, knowing I was the only one in there? As you can imagine, it made me feel sick on the inside. I was feeling very uncomfortable and just wanted to go home. I did my best to ignore him, refraining from making eye contact, and walked out the door. On the side of the building are concrete stairs that lead to a somewhat closed-off parking area for employees to park. I took the stairs, hoping he would lose sight of me and just piss off at this point. I had planned on taking the same route home, as I did walking there, but I was walking down the stairs when something in me told me to stop. I felt very wrong about going home the way I came. I pulled out my phone and began texting my mum about what was going on, and gave her a full description of the man. At this point I was standing at the last stair when I heard and saw his car ever so slowly drive inward towards me in the parking lot. I'm scared now, completely alone, and my mum is almost a half-hour drive away, and I don't know what this dude was planning. I raised my phone up to kind of make it look like I was going to take a picture, although I didn't and wish I had. But I wanted to make it clear that I had my phone with me to hopefully scare him off a bit. That apparently worked, because he began to drive back to the street. But this time, he took the street I came up on, while staring at me and looking behind his seat the entire time as he drove very slowly out of the bank's parking lot. This really got to me, especially the fact he took the road I came up, because to take that road to get to the main street again, you have to go all the way around 2 other huge buildings, so it's very tedious to go in that direction versus go it forwards from the ATM parking lot, where it takes you directly to the main street. I also messaged a close friend of mine explaining the situation as well, and giving her my mum's number just in case anything else happened. I didn't leave the parking lot for a while, staying close in camera view before proceeding out the front entrance, and walking around for an hour into a different neighborhood just to make sure I was no longer being followed. I don't know what the heck this man had intended, or why he was so infatuated with me, but it really bothered me. I will always take my loud alarm that's literally louder than a fire alarm whenever I go outside. The next morning I went to the bank and explained the situation to one of the employees, who took it very seriously and even stressed that I should have called the police and stayed in the lobby. I feel stupid for not calling the police, but I didn't think they'd be able to do much about it, as no crime had actually been committed. Yet. I'm grateful that nothing happened, but it really taught me a lesson. Even if you look like a potato, it doesn't mean someone won't try and do something to you. Ladies and guys, always take some safety precautions before leaving. And if you live alone, let someone know where you're going, what you're wearing, and when to expect a reply from them. Better safe than in the trunk of some guy's car.
We had a patient who informed me that her deceased husband was in there with us, literally there in the room, to take her home. I tried to gently tell her that there was nobody in there with us, but she insisted that her husband was there, and that he'd be taking her home that afternoon after the kids' visit. Okay, fine, whatever. I brushed it off as dementia talk, and figured that if she's happy in this delusion, I'm happy. But sure enough, her kids and grandkids come to visit, left, and she died very peacefully. Gives me shivers to this day. We also have a haunted room. We're only 6 beds, 3 on the left, 3 on the right, with a nurse's station right in the middle. I was at the station chatting with the nurses. This was very early on working there, so I was probably asking some kind of stupid question. Out of the corner of my left eye, I see this elderly gentleman walk into the last room. I took off running because no one should be ambulating without assistance. Only once I get to their room, it was empty. And only then did I realize we didn't have any patients in that room to begin with. I walked back to the nurse's station to find everyone smiling and said, "Did anyone else see a patient out of bed?" One of our nurses just chuckled and said, "Honey, you just met the spook." I've never seen him since, but everyone said it's a superstition around the hospice, and that he only shows himself to people that he likes, and it meant I was formally a part of the team now. For the last 10 years, I've been employed by the Department of Corrections as a correctional officer, sergeant, and then lieutenant. Over those years, I've encountered quite a few things, ranging from relatively mundane to downright unsettling. So here it goes. The facility I work at used to be an old medical hospital for the state some years ago, but was repurposed to be a work camp and then eventually a correctional facility. For context, this place used to not have a fence when it first started. According to some of the older officers I worked with, I never bothered to look into the place's background until some of the stranger things began to occur. Trust me, I know it sounds cliché, but the more I researched, the more I discovered that a fair amount of old hospitals were repurposed into prisons. My first encounter with strange happenings came some years ago, when I was still a fresh-faced officer. The facility has two different parts. One side has a higher-level security setup, while the main side houses our lower-level offenders. At the time, I worked at the higher-level side, with the two-level offenders. For the most part, they behaved pretty well, except for a few times here and there, but that isn't important. What is important is that their cells had thick metal doors that locked whenever they closed. These doors could be opened via a mechanism that would unlock the doors all at once or individually with a normal lock. I was walking the halls, checking in through windows, making sure doors were secured, pretty much anything to get me through the night. For those that work nights, I'm sure I don't have to explain that some nights can be dreadfully boring. While performing my rounds, I turned the corner to head back to my office when I heard the loudest slam from where I had just come from. I turned back around, and to my surprise, all of the doors had somehow unlocked themselves and were flung wide open. Needless to say, all of the offenders were freaked out once they realized what happened, as was I. After ushering them back inside their rooms and giving another check, I went back to my office, almost expecting it to happen again, and phoned my sergeant and asked them what the cause could have been, and he just laughed. Now a bit of background on this guy. He was a sergeant for apparently forever. According to some of the stories I've heard, one of the old grizzled types, just jaded enough to keep the job, but not enough to become fully disillusioned, if that makes sense. He was a good guy overall, had an older technique of dealing with some of the offenders, but I guess it came with the territory. I trusted him well enough. However, when he said, "Oh, that's just Ben acting up," I was skeptical. Who's Ben? One of our old TB patients. What? Yeah, the wing used to be part of the tuberculosis clinic back when the place was a hospital. So the ghost of some TB patient opened all the doors at once? Yeah. Ben, he's harmless, just annoying sometimes. Right. So needless to say, I asked around about the elusive Ben, and sure enough, some of the older officers corroborated the story. Sometimes he'd tap underneath the floors from the basement, open and shut windows, the whole 9 yards. Obviously, my instinct was to try and research the patients, but I guess due to the age, they didn't keep good records. Either that, or just simple ineptitude. With me being unable to research it, I chalked it up to superstition and moved on. Small things happened here and there as the months went on. I would do a round, come back to my office, and my cup would be in a different spot to where I left it. Or someone would knock on my office door. But when I went to open it, there wouldn't be anyone there. Now normally I'm a pretty skeptical person, and would chalk those occurrences up to the long shifts or other officers pulling a prank, even though my dorm had doors that lock, and I can definitely hear when those big damn things would close. But as more things happened, the less sure of myself I became. Eventually I got promoted to sergeant. With that came more pay and more responsibilities. One of those included doing regular basement checks. Now I dreaded this, not because of the creepy factor, I could handle that, but because those basements are just slightly taller than cellars in most places, due to the piping and electrical. Being a tall person, I hated doing basement checks, but since they were part of my responsibilities, I didn't complain too much. My knees, however, did. Surely enough, while doing one of these checks in the facility's medical building, I got another unsettling encounter. The basement of the medical building must have been an old morgue, since one of the rooms had that big metal wall with the slots for bodies, I'm guessing. In the darkness, I tend to glance through that room as quickly as possible, and unfortunately for me, I noticed that one of the doors to the slots was open. To be honest, I was more irritated than scared, because now I had to do more thorough searching of the basement, and I radioed the situation to my lieutenant and let them know that I was going to be doing a detailed search. After cautiously entering the room, I found the light switch and went to work. Naturally, I found nothing out of the ordinary. I closed the door to the slot, gave the place one last sweep and headed topside to ask the medical staff some questions. General stuff, did anyone go down there, etc. Naturally, no one had been down there in a bit, since most of the basements are used for storage, and as convenient as a morgue body wall is for storage, it wouldn't have been the best idea to use it. Still, I couldn't shake that creepy feeling of being watched, even before I found the slot open. The next big event came in the dead of night. One of the more boring shifts. Mind you, this was back on the higher level part of campus. Though by this point, we had lost most of our higher level offenders, so it was pretty quiet over there. After talking to the officer responsible for the dorm, I made my way outside and to the sally port, an entrance essentially, to pick up some items. I spoke to one of the officers there for a bit, then made my way back to the dorms to resume a bit of paperwork and time killing. On the dorms, there are 3 wings, so the building essentially looks like a T, only all legs are equally sized, and each wing has 2 floors. Ever since most of the offenders were released or moved on, 1 floor of the wing has been utilized only. I tell you all of this because when I glanced upstairs into one of the windows, I saw what appeared to be the silhouette of something vaguely human. It was unmoving, didn't shift or appear as I kept my eyes on it while I approached the door to the dorm. I radioed the officer and asked what his location was. "I'm in the day room, Sergeant." "Downstairs?" "Downstairs." Crap. Keep in mind the wing that I saw the silhouette in was also entirely inactive and being used for storing old bunks, mattresses and other items. Also, there are doors that lead to the 2nd floor of each wing, and only sergeants and above have access to the keys that unlocked them. This entire time, I still had eyes on the person, so I talked to the officer again. "Meet me at your hallway door, please." "On my way." Eventually, he made his way to the door and we talked. I looked towards him to ask him if he saw what I saw, and of course, as soon as I looked back, the thing is gone. I felt like I was in a cliché horror movie at that point. I was expecting heavy breathing in my radio next or something like that. So once again, being that I saw something suspect, I had to be the dumbass to go check it out. I made my way upstairs, unlocked the door and checked the place out. Thankfully, the lights are practically always on up there, so I didn't have to deal with darkness like in the basement. As soon as I entered upstairs, the hair on the back of my neck stood up like I was being watched. I got this horribly uncomfortable feeling of not being welcome, like I had just entered a bear's turf. The entire time I was checking the place out, I couldn't shake that feeling. Eventually, I found the room where I saw the silhouette, and wouldn't you know it, there wasn't an item in the room. No coat rack with a big jacket to make it look like a person, no lamp with a hat on it, nothing. And after checking the doors and windows, I promptly got the hell out of there and met up with the officer again to let him know what I saw. He was understanding but seemed a bit skeptical since he was a newer guy. Can't say I blame him, to be honest. There are several other smaller things that have happened as well. I guess I've been here long enough to experience a vast variety of these things. More silhouettes in windows of abandoned buildings, old storage buildings that light up all at once at night, and then flicker on and off throughout the night. With that one, I told my lieutenant that my arse wasn't going to go in there alone, not at 1 a.m. Objects moving on their own, even in our security footage. Hell, I've even spoken to several offenders who told me they hear voices at night in their room, and others that refuse to sleep in certain rooms at night at all. If you work in a place where you have access to security cameras and a board, definitely check those things out. I've seen chairs scoot around on their own, the hair of offenders move on its own, balls rolling on their own, and a few other things. Of course, I can't show you the footage. Legally, I'm not allowed to take it out of the gate, and I'm not going to lose my job for something that might be easily explained. Besides, being a lieutenant now, I mostly get to experience stuff like that throughout the cameras, or the stories that the officers now tell me when I make my rounds. Now, as I've said before, I hate going into the basements of various buildings for security checks. 2 of our main buildings have basements that must have been used to house patients back when the place was a medical facility, because the place is set up much like the hallways on the 1st and 2nd floor. When you think of where I work, don't think of one big cell block. Think more of a college dorm-style housing, at least on the main campus. I've taken my fair share of peeks around the basement, especially in the rooms and little cubbies that the place has, and the creepiest things I've encountered are the following. There is an old wooden door on one part of the basement that has the phrase, "Run away," scrawled into the wood. Now obviously when I first saw it I was a little freaked out, but since the words were on my side of the door, I quickly figured that it must have been a previous officer or other staff member that did it. The maintenance staff run through the basement all the time. Hell, it could have even been one of the offenders since before the pandemic they used to work with the maintenance staff. Not really paranormal or anything, but a neat little thing I wanted to add. In several of the older rooms, I've seen actual chains and places in the stonework where manacles once resided. When I first heard about it from my sergeant at the time, I obviously brushed it off as some workplace nonsense that they tell you to freak you out. Gotta get through nights somehow, right? But sure enough, I saw it. The realization happened. Yeah, the place used to be a medical facility. God only knows what kind of crazy, inhumane stuff went down here. We also have a tunnel network, and I wish I was joking. It has a full-on tunnel network that connects most of the buildings. Now this is one of those where I don't want to do too much poking around with, mostly because I mean tunnels. Obviously I'm yet to explore them fully, but I found some of the dead ends. It's weird as hell to turn a corner, walk a little, and then have the tunnel stop all of a sudden. I'm guessing they had plans for expansion or something at one point, or maybe even old buildings that got destroyed over time. When I asked the veterans about the tunnels, I got this. So why does this place have an entire tunnel system? That's how they transported the bodies, so the other patients wouldn't see them. What, so all the buildings are connected? To the old morgue? Yeah. Foolishly, it was around this time I finally decided to do some deep digging of the place. Now, I previously said the place was a hospital, then a work camp, then a correctional facility. But unbeknownst to me, it started off as an asylum. Once I learned that, obviously that little spark of excitement and muted fear entered my head. Like I've mentioned previously, I'm a skeptic, always have been. But when you learn what the old buildings you walk through regularly were part of, and had a TB wing, well, the horror movie buff inside me was practically giddy. One of the strangest things I've had happen to me involves me doing what 90% of my time was spent doing at night, walking around old buildings and checking doors. I was assigned to the administration building that night, and after the place settled down, I decided to make my rounds of the place. Now the building has a few places: a library, visitation rooms, classrooms, you name it. The main attraction, however, was the administration hall proper. This is where the warden's office resides, among several other of our higher-ups. At night, this place is pretty dead since most of the admin folk work their 8 to 4 shift. I was checking every door to make sure they were locked, when I heard something further down the hall start to rattle. For a visual, the hall is designed like a blocky, chubby U-shape. The sound seemed like it was coming from the other leg of the U, whereas I was on the opposite leg. I turned the corner and made my way down after calling out to see if someone was there. To no response. That's when every door in the hallway started to shake all at once, as if a horde of zombies got their cue to burst out the hallway. I'm not ashamed to admit that I booked it the hell out of there and closed the door behind me. Having been an officer at the time, I let my sergeant know, and once again was met with, "Yeah, that happens." Having been one of my earlier encounters, I obviously said, "What the hell do you mean, that happens? How messed up is this place?" Their answer? Very. Leave it to me to find a career in a place where everyone is just numb to weird, unexplainable stuff. The last story I have is the creepiest one I have to offer. Doors shaking and stuff moving, I can kind of explain away. But this one, well, I can't explain it away easily. Now, I'm not a drinker. I don't smoke weed, never tripped on shrooms or anything like that. The worst I do is smoke and have a caffeine addiction, but whatever. I preface because I need you to know that I was sound of mind and body when I had the following little interaction. One night, as per usual, once the offenders had gone to bed and the place was settled, I was up doing rounds and browsing Reddit for a bit. Most nights at the time were spent browsing Reddit and doing security checks. Not a bad gig, right? Then, I saw some movement going upstairs. Confused, I thought it was my sergeant or another higher-up that came to do their rounds. Figuring I'd break up their solitude, I went and searched for them, for some chatting for the night. I didn't hear boots going up the stairs, but I had a quiet sergeant at the time, and I just called out to them. "Hey, Sergeant Red." There was no response. I turned the stairs to head up, and at the top of the stairs is a door with a window in it. Well, I saw what looked like a white sheet or something that moved away from the door. Weird, laundry was closed, and even if it wasn't, there wasn't a setup for a washer or dryer there anyway. I trotted up the stairs and opened the door, and saw what looked like a woman, in one of those old white nightgowns facing away from me. Also weird, because offenders aren't issued with granny clothes, especially not nightgowns. Okay, this is some kind of weird prank. We had female officers and still do on shift, since the place I work at is all female anyway. So obviously it was one of them having a laugh after being spurred on by one of the sergeants. I rolled my eyes and called out, "Alright, funny, good stuff. I've seen horror movies too, I know the trope. How the hell did you even get a nightgown through the gates anyway? Get a release for it from the warden? There was no response. She moved into the room. It was a bathroom. Another roll of my eyes, and I made my way towards the room, stopping at the door. I announced my presence, as male staff have to announce before we enter a bathroom for obvious reason, and walked in. I checked the place pretty thoroughly and found, well, no one. The stall doors were open, shower curtains were pulled back, any hiding places were snuffed out. I was clearly seeing stuff, right? Well, my sergeant thought so, since by the time I got back to my office the phone was ringing. My sergeant called me. "Are you okay?" "Well, sort of. I saw you looking all weird and stuff when you left the bathroom." "Yeah. Hey, did you see anyone enter the bathroom before I did?" "Nah, dude, it's like 2 a.m. "Great, so I'm just losing my mind. It's fine." And then I told him about what I saw. He didn't seem too surprised, but this was the same cat that was unsurprised about literally every other weird thing that happened to me. I promise I work with other people besides him. There isn't anything else to that story, no grand discovery of an infamous woman in white or anything so romantic. Just some unanswered questions, like namely, what the hell did I see?
This happened a good 7 years ago. I wasn't the best person back then, and was heavy into drugs, and was one of the biggest dope cooker's proteges. That's what he called me. The thing between us went on for a good 6 months. He would lock me in a garage and tell me to work. He became abusive and began getting high on his own supply, and things got crazy from there. One day he hurt me badly, and when he wasn't around I took the supplies, our supplies and my stuff, and that was that. I stayed low for about a month, was living with some friends and got a Facebook message from some guy I knew, and he said he had some things I would need, since he really needed money, and he was someone I thought I could trust. So myself and my female friend drove over to his house. When we pull up, I see there are about 6 or more guys, which for this area is normal. I get out and walk up to them to get the stuff, and they all surround me. They say that Ron, the guy from earlier, was on his way and I'm not going anywhere. I almost blacked out at that point, when Ron comes flying up in a truck with a van behind him, and he jumps out, grabs me by the hair and throws me in the van, and has someone drive his truck and follow us, and my poor girlfriend was so scared I yelled at her to leave. I was terrified. Ron was a dangerous person, and had already done prison time for murder. For 3 days he held me hostage, and said he would kill me before he let me leave. And at all times I had tons of eyes watching me. He even followed me when I went to the bathroom. I didn't think I'd ever get away. I decided I could either kill him or play it off like I wanted to be with him, and decided to play it cool. The 3rd day it was late afternoon, and he took me out into the boonies. He had to work on someone's vehicle, and I stayed in the person's house while he was outside. I was finally alone. I checked every room to find a window I could leave out, but saw a side door with a dog tied up outside near the porch. So I went outside and acted like I was petting the dog, and when he wasn't looking I started walking behind the house and ran. I went into the woods, and halfway through, I saw and heard his loud truck speeding down the road, and I ran faster until I reached a little neighborhood and ran up the first house and knocked on the big glass door. This young girl in her teens answered the door, and I was hysterical, and she told me to come in, and her dad came out and saw me and asked me how they could help. I asked them to please take me to my friend's house and explain what happened. He asked if I needed them to call the cops, but at the time I had a warrant, so I just said no, I wanted to go home. I went into the garage, got in their car and sat on the floorboards until we reached the interstate, and just started bawling and thanking them, telling them how they saved my life. I am still so thankful for the family that saved me. I knew I looked a mess, hadn't showered in 3 days, and they still helped me. I got to my friends and thanked him one last time and ran up to the door and knocked. When my friend answered the door, she looked like she saw a ghost and gave me the biggest hug and started to cry. She thought I had been killed. After that, I made sure to be more careful, and about a year later finally got clean and left the state for good. Ron went to prison for other reasons, and I'm not sure when he'll be released, but hopefully never. There are good people out there, but there are some scary ones. Be careful who you trust, people. Remember, even though you may feel invincible, you're not. No one is. Sometimes just talking about it makes my heart race when I think about how I escaped. It still feels like a dream. It was freshman year of high school, and I was at the first boy-girl party that anyone in my nerdy group of friends had thrown. I was obviously looking to impress the ladies and get out of my forever alone stage of life. So if I could find a way to do that, I was gonna take it. Lucky for me, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to arm wrestle. I said, sure, and we went over to a ping pong table, set up in a corner, and someone said go. I started to push, and for just a second time slowed down. I realized that my arm was not moving forward like I thought it was going to. It was staying still. Suddenly there was a loud pop, and my arm went limp at my side. It didn't really hurt, but I knew something was really wrong, and I ran out of the room to collect my thoughts. I knew I had just broken my arm, but I had never broken a bone before, and who ever heard of someone breaking their arm while arm wrestling in high school? So the next 2 weeks I operated under the assumption that I had pulled a muscle or something. My arm didn't hurt, but I couldn't lift it higher than 90 degrees. I was even in gym class at the time and played badminton underhand. Eventually my family realized it wasn't getting better, so after those 2 weeks I went to the doctor, who told me that unsurprisingly it was broken. Apparently I had a benign cyst in the marrow of my humerus bone. That meant my arm was very prone to breaking, and the arm wrestling was just the straw that broke the camel's back. So now, I go back to school and admit to everyone I had broken my arm, wrestling the smallest girl in the freshman class. Not only that, but because of my cyst, I wasn't allowed to play any sports until my marrow filled back in. So I had to take another study hall instead of gym. Except I didn't take a study hall. I went to my school's TV studio and did the announcements that were videotaped and shown all over school. That meant that everyone got to see me in my sling, and eventually everyone knew the story, just not the medical reason behind it. Sometimes the cysts will fill themselves in after a break, but that didn't happen for me. I had to go in for surgery to fill in my arm with some marrow from my hip, and some synthetic marrow. A few weeks after the surgery, I noticed the scar I was left with was purple, swollen, and draining an orange, watery liquid out of it. I didn't let anyone know this for a while, but eventually I found out I had to go back to the hospital for 2 more surgeries to clean out the infected, pus-filled scar. So after all of that, my arm is now fine. I have a huge 1 by 3 inch scar on my arm and a 4-inch scar on my hip, and a story that I got over being embarrassed about 10 years ago. I work on an adult oncology unit where unfortunately we have a lot of comfort care patients. The majority of them transition to hospice where they live out their final days. Sometimes they don't quite make it and they pass away while they're still in the hospital. We have the most deaths in the hospital on our unit, and a lot of floats don't like coming up to the floor because everyone dies. We all love it though, and wouldn't have it any other way. There's so much love between all the nurses and our patients, and we get to know them really well. When people pass away, we have noticed that, not surprisingly, it comes in threes. We will go a few weeks with no one passing away. Everyone successfully makes it out of there and onto a hospice or to a TCU, wherever they choose to go to pass on. Only to have a week or two where we have 3 to 6 deaths a week. One week we had 2 patients pass away in one night. One of the patients was still roommate. She was really near and dear to our hearts, and it was a rough time for everyone involved.
She had been on the floor for a prolonged period of time as we all watched her go from a spry old lady to basically wasting away in all aspects. She passed at night, and by the next day there was a new patient in her room. It's hard on us all, and we all know patients come and go, and we have to move on. I was doing the admission with the new patient and going over room orientation stuff. I explained that she has a one-stop shop remote which controlled the lights, TV, radio, and had the call light. Right as I finished explaining to her that the TV buttons are right here, I set the remote down on her bed and instantly the TV turned on by itself. It began flipping through each channel at an alarming rate, faster than if you were just to hold down the channel up button. She was a little older and thankfully was not observant and thought I was doing it, but no one was touching it. She says, "No thank you, I don't want the TV on right now." So I reached down and tried to turn it off. It didn't turn off, and I ended up panicking a bit inside and yanked the remote out of the wall and telling her that it seemed not to be working properly and that I would get her a new one. The TV still wouldn't turn off after I unplugged the remote from the wall, and normally it would be all connected and not working if it wasn't plugged in properly. I had to end up walk and manually shut off the TV. I head out of there telling her I'd be right back, and as I went to the nurse's desk to grab another one, I ran into another nurse. She was grabbing another remote, which was odd. We just got a new shipment in, and they were all normally working properly. We rarely had to replace them anymore, and I asked her if her remote was broken too, and she said that hers was acting up. I then asked her which room she was in, and it was another room that a patient had passed in the night before also. The TV remotes were uncharacteristically acting up from across the wing at the same time in the same rooms that people had died the night before. Freaky. I could ramble forever, but most stories are related to the TV. I had another situation similar to the one I just described, where the volume was going up and down by itself in a room where a patient had passed on recently. I've seen lights not work and then work again. I have even seen a sink turn on where there was no one else around. We have several designated rooms that are reserved for our comfort care patients, and even when they are occupied, we will walk by them and it feels like someone's in there. But when we look, it's clearly empty. We have a room where IV pumps stop working and BP machines quit on us, and nothing seems to work. But that room got cleansed by a healing touch volunteer, which I know sounds crazy, but since then everything in the room works fine. I've never been a huge believer in the paranormal or supernatural, but after working on this unit the past year, it's not hard to believe. We all just embrace it, because what can you really do? I'm a psychiatric registered nurse. I worked at a place that was haunted. It had an old hospital prior to being converted into a psychiatric hospital, a place where surgeries were performed and presumably a place where patients died. I received phone calls from the police during night shift once, stating that they'd received calls from a little girl and that the calls were coming from our hospital. They were able to give me the extension number of the line, and it turned out that the calls were being made from the arts and crafts room. Nobody goes there at night, ever. As supervisor, I knew where my staff were at all times, and there was never any need for anyone to go in there at night. No patients could possibly have been in there, as there are several locks they'd have to get through first. Also, night shift staffing was minimal, and we were a small 35-bed hospital, so there were only about 6 or 7 of us at any given night. The little girl that would identify herself as Santana, according to the police, would call and ask for help and then hung up. As you can imagine, no girl was ever found. I work at a psych ward that used to be a hospital in California. All stories happened during third shift between midnight and 8:30 a.m. The first thing was on the adolescent unit. Staff used to see a teenage girl enter one of the rooms, specifically 302. So many times, the patients that were in that room, not knowing anything about it, would see this girl sitting on the window still crying. I had one of the patients refuse to even sleep in there after seeing the girl. The patient was not schizo, nor had any type of impaired visual hallucination. Now, at this psych ward, you also have a woman that numerous staff have seen on a psych unit that we call Adult F. It used to be a maternity unit when it was a hospital, and supposedly the girl went into labor, lost one of the twins during birth, and also died. You can hear her saying, "Where's my baby?" over and over. The next one is on the children's unit. So my uncle works on the children's unit. About 2 years ago, a tech, someone that also works the unit, comes into the nurse's station saying to my uncle, "I just saw a kid go into the day room, and I went to go check it out, and no one was there." So my uncle puts up the security cameras, and both my uncle and the tech are watching the cameras, only to see this person appear on the camera and just stand there. Immediately both of them jumped back, and the tech said, "He's going to break." It left them scared out of their minds for the remaining 2 hours. This next story is also on the children's unit. So the one tech I know is watching a suicide patient, which basically is a one-to-one, and you're just making sure they don't do anything. The tech is sitting and watching the patient, and this little girl comes up to him and asks if she can get a glass of water. He says, "I can't get it for you, sweetie. You have to wait till the nurse comes back on the unit." She says, "Okay," and goes back to her room. He watched the girl go into her room. So the nurse comes back, and the tech asks the nurse that the girl in 202 wants water. The nurse says, "There isn't anyone assigned to that room. No girls were on that unit during the day." So the last one. The nurse I know was working on an adult unit for third shift. She said she was taking a selfie in the nurse's station and looked around to make sure there was no one around in the halls, or no patients or anything, because, you know, HIPPA. Well, she takes the picture, and about a week later is showing her friend. Her friend asked her who the guy in the background was. She showed the picture, and it was a tall, black figure. I'll have to ask her if she still has it. The only time I saw anything paranormal was in the children's unit. I heard children running in the hall at night while everyone was asleep, and when I go to the day room at night, I get a very frightening feeling.
I met this kid at my hockey practice in March. The hockey team was made up of a range of kids from ages 11 to 13. This kid had recently changed teams to this one for various reasons and seemed pretty nice. We all got along pretty well, and one day after a game he introduced our parents to each other, and we all went to a diner for lunch after that. His family seemed nice and he seemed like an average kid. I invited him over, and we bought a bike and scooter to the park and played hide and seek in the playground. One day I invited him over to my house to hang out, and after playing some video games for a while, we took our scooters to the park. I keep repeating how average this kid seemed because what happened the next day still confuses me. We had just won our first hockey game in a tournament and wouldn't play our next game until the next day. I invited him to lunch with my mum and her friend, who had decided to come along and watch the game. And after eating, my mum drove us to my house. He lived in a pretty bad part of town, so I had always declined his mum's invitation to come over. We planned to go outside and play tennis on some nearby backboards, but first we would play some video games. During one of our games, his mum called and said he had to leave soon so that he wouldn't be late for his next activity. He told me he was going to take my trophy with him. For background, this previous season I had played his old team and beat them in the finals of the tournament funded by them, so he probably had a bit of resentment for that, especially since my trophy was bigger than his. Anyway, he disappeared with the trophy, and since my apartment is very small, I thought he was right outside in the corridor trying to prank me. But I looked in our front hall and saw his shoes still out there. I called out for him next to the door. "You left your shoes," and I got no reply from outside, but I heard a slight shuffling from inside a walk-in closet next to our front hall that was used for my mum's extra clothes that did not fit in her small closet. I was 99% sure it was him, and 5 seconds later the closet door slides open and he climbs out, only to get an extremely loud boo from me. My mum, who was currently talking on the phone, did not appreciate the loud noise and told us that we could only act like that outside. The kid then walked to my room, shut the door and locked it. My door had one of those click locks that had a little hole on the other side so that you could easily put a piece of wire into it if you happened to lock yourself out. So I went to look for something in the kitchen that I could use to open the door. At this point, what he was doing was getting kind of annoying. My mum got mad at me for rummaging around in the kitchen at that moment, when the kid walked out of my room and over to the kitchen. He was supposed to be leaving, and instead he was stalling in a really creepy way. When I looked over, he was in the kitchen holding our biggest steak knife and was handling it as if he was imagining what it would be like if he ran it through someone. I couldn't take this, so I went to my mum's room and told her the kid was holding a knife. She told the person on the phone line that she had to go and asked the kid what on earth he was thinking. He denied ever touching the knife, although I could prove him wrong with the fingerprints, and my mum told him that he really needed to go. I walked him to the elevator, and when it came in, he got in and said, "I took something." So I held the elevator, and before I asked what he took, he told me he didn't take anything. He repeated this shenanigan a few more times before my mum started yelling at me about holding the elevator, so I laughed this off and finally let him go. When the elevator beeped indicating it was on the floor below me, he called up the shaft, "I took your tripod." For background, my tripod was a stand that would plug into the charger hole in my iPhone. I used it to prop up my phone when I recorded videos and time-lapses. He had first seen my tripod the day before, when I let him use it to make a YouTube video of him playing my keyboard. He was fascinated by it. Anyway, I went back into our apartment, looked all over for it, and came to the conclusion that he had in fact taken it. That was when I got a FaceTime call from him. He was outside my building on the street, and he smiled and held up the tripod. I was pissed, but remained calm, and handed the FaceTime to my mum, who told him in a very firm way to bring it back immediately. A minute later we realized we should have told him to leave it with the front desk of the building, as we didn't want him coming anywhere near us again. Unfortunately, when I called him, he was already in the elevator, so I advised him to leave it right outside the elevator door. I was not concerned about this, since we only have 2 sets of neighbors who dominate all the other apartments on our floor and are almost never in the country. I stayed on the FaceTime call with him until he got to my floor, and I watched him put the tripod down on the floor in front of the elevator, and I never saw him go back since he covered the camera with his finger. For the next few minutes we heard this kid walking around outside our front door. He must have been there quite a while, because after 15 minutes I FaceTimed him again, and he was just walking out of the lobby. Please note there were quite a few buzzes before he answered, so he'd probably been sitting in the lobby when he got tired of being outside our house. We quickly called the front desk and said the kid was not welcome back in. I don't know if the kid was just bored or what. I had learnt the day before that he was obsessed with Pennywise the clown. I don't know very much about him, so I don't know if the kid was pretending to be him. I wonder why he felt the need to steal a $5 tripod that I would have most likely given to him had he asked for it. I don't know why he was in my mother's closet. It also confuses me why he handled and inspected one of our kitchen knives. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I'd have not notified my mum that one of our knives had been in his possession, or if I'd not told him to leave the tripod outside the elevator instead of coming to the front door. I may be seriously overreacting, but it was quite disturbing to me. I'm still playing hockey on that team, and I'm going to go see the kid again tomorrow. It may have all been laughs for him, but did I mention that he continuously begged to stay for sleepovers even though I barely knew him? After this, it's a definite no-no, and I don't think I will ever invite him to my house again.
I work overnight security in one of the largest, best, and oldest hospitals in the US. My fellow security officers and I have stories about one building in particular, but the one I'm about to tell is the one that happened to me. Backstory for the building: it was built in the late 1800s. It was the original psychiatric building for the hospital. Now, being the late 1800s, not much was truly known about psychiatric disorders. On top of that, the hospital was known for its medical research. With both of these facts combined, you can infer that some terrible stuff was done to the misunderstood psych patients in this building. A few years before I started working security there, this building had been converted into offices after the newly built part of the hospital dedicated a section for an updated psych ward. And now, it's time for my story. My rounds for that night happened to include said building. At night, this building was empty due to recently being converted into offices, and the drones who worked there wanting to leave promptly at 5, if not earlier. In some of their haste, they left their office doors unlocked, which is a big no-no due to medical information being located in said offices. It was our duty to go to each floor and make sure every door was locked, and if it wasn't, to secure it ourselves. I did my initial sweep of the building to make sure it was clear, and that there was nobody in the building, and proceeded to do my door checks. The hallways were pretty narrow, so I could check both sides of the hallway doors at once. At the end of this hallway, there were 2 sets of doors you had to go through to reach the final office, which was a dead end. Everything was secure. Awesome. Time for the next floor. I exited the 2 sets of doors from the dead-end office and stood absolutely frozen from what I saw. Every door ajar, set perfectly so their own weight wouldn't cause them to shut again, and one wheelchair at the end of said hallway, facing towards the steps. I had heard other security officers outright reject that set of rounds due to strange stuff happening there, but I laughed it off until that night happened, and I never took those rounds again. The old children's ICU is currently under construction to be turned into medical labs, so we have to patrol the area. Once again, to make sure the area is secure, or to report it to the contractor/foreman, planned for the next day. When patrolling this area, several security officers have reported seeing a single white male child, around the age of 5 to 7, with short brown hair. Think 90s bowl cut. I personally dismissed this, as this was before the psych ward incident, as a tall tale told with the intent to scare me, because I was new at the time. I got that building's patrol one night, and a foreman who stayed late called security and asked for a security officer to come up because a kid had locked himself in a room, and I didn't want him to get hurt with all the open wires in there, or something to that effect. I unlocked the door for him, looked in what could only be a 10 by 8 room for about 10 minutes, and there was no kid. I called it in as a false alarm and finished my patrol. There was another occasion when I had a special detail, aka babysitting a violent psych patient, along with another security officer. He woke up in the middle of the night, recognized the other officer, and said hello. He sees me, and immediately began screaming at me to not hurt him. Now I'm a rather large gentleman, 6'2" and 250 pounds, but I try not to make myself too intimidating around psych patients as to not escalate the situation. He keeps screaming for me not to hurt him, and he says if I promise not to, he would make something good happen for me. I promise, he calms down, goes back to sleep, and I forget about it. Next day, I got a permanent set of rounds and a pretty good promotion. Easily a coincidence, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless. A fellow security officer had rounds in the aforementioned psych building. He heard a call on the radio in what could only be described as a dry-throat voice of terror for one officer for backup. So I responded to his call by letting him know I was on my way. When I got there, he had his head between his knees and was silently crying with a shattered chandelier a few feet next to him. Before I had experienced the abnormal happenings in the building, I would have written off his testimony as idiocy, but he claims that something held him in that spot as the chandelier started swinging wildly until it began to fall. When it started to fall, he was let go and allowed to move, and he scrambled out of the way before it hit him. He got up, calmed down, and took him back to the supervisor. She yelled at one of our other supervisors, "Almost lost another one in that building." The other supervisor laughed and said, "Why do you think we only send in the new guys? You know I don't even like going there." That guy is my roommate, and always hates when I bring up that experience. I was in the 4th grade when I was riding my scooter to my neighbor's house where my sister was. One house down from my destination, 2 pit bulls who were not leashed or fenced decided they were hungry. They attacked me and gave me wounds on both my arms and both my legs. My neighbor decided to come out to make sure I arrived safely, and thankfully she did, because when she saw me being attacked, her scream was loud enough to notify the owners of the dogs, who came out and got them off me. A van pulled by and took me home, where my father tied some clean rags around my wounds and rushed me to the hospital. I ended up receiving more than 60 stitches and was incapacitated for the rest of summer, which sucked, because it was the beginning of summer and I played Little League Baseball. It probably wasn't until senior year of high school that I got over the whole incident, but I remember it made me really emotional and frightened as a child afterwards. I'm 26 now, almost 27, and don't have a fear of dogs anymore, and can at least talk about it without getting emotional. The scars are always a nice conversation piece, especially in summer when all of them are exposed by shorter clothing. I tell people not to be sorry for mentioning them, because I just don't care anymore. But dog owners, be careful with your dogs. I'm a nurse, and was walking down the hallway and going into the clean utility room to get a warm blanket. Someone was walking ahead of me about 6 to 8 feet. I couldn't tell you anything about them or what they looked like, but I remember thinking it was a staff member. They opened the door to the clean utility, which requires a punching code, and it shuts before I got to it. Mildly annoyed that they didn't hold it open for me, I opened the door, but no one's in there. I thought it was weird but didn't tell anyone about it or think much of it. Or later that night, a co-worker and I were talking about the shift and she said, "Oh yeah, and now we have a ghost." I asked her what she meant, and she went on to explain my exact experience, only it had been told to her by another co-worker. Same hallway, same clean utility, the same general feeling of it being a staff member, but he couldn't tell you any descriptive details at all. It has since happened to 3 more people over the last year or so. When I was 16, I had an elderly neighbor who used to go off to visit her son now and then, who lived some miles away. One day in summer we remarked to one another about my elderly neighbor's absence, and was told this time she hadn't actually gone at all. We hadn't seen her for 2 weeks. We tried to get her attention via the doorbell, but it was no use. Being 16 and brave, I went round the back of the house and vaulted the garden wall. I positioned a bucket against the back window and climbed into it. Inside I could see a winged black chair turned 30 degrees away from the window. I could see her long grey hair hanging down and her left arm draped over the left armrest. I don't know what possessed me to do it at that point, but I jumped off the bucket and opened her kitchen door. At which point, the smell hit me. My legs turned to jelly, and I walked through her tiny kitchen and into her lounge, where I saw her sitting as I had seen from the outside, clearly dead. The smell was, dear God, unholy. She was about 10 feet away from me. I forced myself to look into her face. Her eyes were open and translucent. One appeared to have something seriously odd about it. Then it moved. The biggest spider I had ever seen had taken up residence within her vacant eyeball, and I ran all the way home. I work on a busy surgical floor and do 2 12-hour days, then 2 nights, and then off for 4. During my day shift, I had a patient who was only in his early 50s but had terminal cancer and was in extreme pain, as it was all throughout his bones. He decided to undergo physician-assisted suicide and asked that I be in assistance. The doctor came and performed the procedure on my second day shift. The next night, I came in for my shift and had a new patient that was a 45-year-old man who had just had a small bowel resection staying in that room, and he got back from surgery that morning, was totally clear, walking around okay, and was only taking Tram for pain. He was completely oriented and not confused whatsoever. Anyway, around 3 a.m., he comes around and starts ringing his bell, and I go to his room, and he asks me why this other patient keeps coming into his room and telling him to leave. He seemed genuinely freaked out and a bit annoyed, so I asked him to describe the patient, and he did. I couldn't really think of any other patients on that floor that fit the profile. This entire time, our care aide was sitting outside his room, charting on her mobile workstation, and she just so happened to be parked near his room. I asked if she saw anyone, and she said no, so I started looking in all the rooms, but everyone was asleep. I told the guy I'm not sure who it was, but if he bothered him again to ring right away and let one of us know. 45 minutes later, Buddy rings again, and it's the same thing. I look around and couldn't see anyone. The care aide was still there, and she said no one had been out that she saw. I asked for the description of the guy again, and this time I wrote it down, as I was going to tell security, and, as he's describing the guy, he mentions this fish tattoo on the forearm, and I think, weird. The guy in here before who died had a tattoo like this in his forearm. Then I told that to the care aide, and she was the one who then mentioned that it sounded like the guy who died, and I got freaked out, and we were both really creeped out after that. I just told the guy to go back to bed and that we were dealing with it in the hallway. I have never been so creeped out in all my life. A long time ago when I was 17, I was fresh out of CNA training and pretty naive. This was my first job and I loved working with the elderly. I liked the way it made me feel, like I was doing something positive to help people. One thing they don't train you on is for strange and unexplainable things that you will see. It started off as just another quiet night, with nothing going on. We were sitting in our nursing station and everything was quiet, and the patients were all sleeping. It was about mid-shift, around midnight, when I heard it. A loud, eerie moan from down the hall. A lady called Mary. The other CNAs had told me about her. that sometimes she would just wake up and start moaning, like she was incredibly sad or mournful. Before I could get down the hall, she had moaned a few more times. I was heading down to her room when suddenly the fire doors slammed shut. It made me jump because there was nothing going on that would have caused them to close like that. There's no fire alarm, no smoke I can smell, then why did they shut? It was so unexpected. I stopped walking to look around, and I looked around to see who else could have done it, but there was no one there. Just then, the other two CNAs on shift came to see what was going on. The doors to the other two halls had shut as well. We decided there was no fire, but we did a round on each hall just to make sure. As I was doing my rounds, I got to Mary's room and saw she was awake. The only patients we found who were awake, and no sooner had I started helping her did she start moaning again, and I couldn't believe it. In my short time working there, I had never witnessed her behave like this before. This little old lady didn't speak, was bent and stiff from arthritis, and light as a feather. How could such a small, frail lady make such a huge noise? After I finished helping Mary, I went to the next room on my hall and found that the lady in that room had passed away. As soon as I stepped into her room, Mary stopped moaning and didn't make a peep for the rest of the night. I quickly notified my nurses and started getting her ready, and called the family to come and pay their final respects. As I worked, I wondered, could she have been trying to let us know? How could she have known? To this day, I don't know how she knew, but each time someone passed away, she would moan until the person was found, and the fire doors would shut on each end of the hall.
To build context, I'm an Irish female, and this happened back in 2007, when I was in my mid-20s. Back then I loved going to the clubs to dance the night away. One particular night I went out with some friends, which included my cousin Frank. We went to a nightclub, had some drinks, and danced to the Daft Punk One More Time, as well as other popular music of the time. I wasn't living in this town at the time, so I arranged to stay at Frank's house. We had a fridge stocked with beer for when we got back and planned on getting wasted. We probably left the club at 1 a.m. and got a taxi to his house. Back at Frank's house, we spent a good few hours listening to Led Zeppelin, Nirvana, with a bit of Metallica thrown in for good measure. My cousin was in a rock band and loved the classics. At around 3 a.m., Frank's bandmate Jack called and asked if he could come over to stay. He had been clubbing at a different location and needed somewhere to crash. Frank lived alone in a 3-bedroom house, and being a single guy, he hosted a few wild parties over the years. Frank told him no problem and that he could come over, but explained that we were having a quiet night. In other words, not to bring anyone else. Jack came over and seemed super friendly. Being the drummer of the band, he looked exactly like what I expected. Long hair, Zeppelin t-shirt and ripped jeans. His behavior changed not long after arriving. He was super animated and was just on a different buzz. He definitely seemed drugged up on something, and hey, so long as he enjoys himself, who am I to judge? At one stage, he started playing air drums and continued with it for ages. During one of his air drum solos, I asked him to play something and he didn't answer, and I kind of nudged him very lightly, but just to get his attention. That's when he went crazy and starting shouted at me to never interrupt him when he was playing drums. That pissed me off. I didn't like the aggression. Frank said, "Relax, man, there's no need to shout." Jack replied that no one should interrupt him when he was in the zone. Frank and I rolled our eyes and carried on chatting, drinking, and ignoring him. The atmosphere after that had changed, and the shift prompted me to go to bed. I don't know how long later, but I was awoken from a deep sleep when I heard this breathing sound in my room. I'm still in a drunken slumber, and it took me a few minutes to register that the noise sounded like someone inhaling. Someone was in my bed, with a bunch of my hair in his hands just sniffing it. I froze. "What the hell are you doing?" "Relax, I'm just smelling your hair," said Jack. "Not gonna do anything." while adrenaline coursed through me. But I was stuck to the bed with fear, and the room was pitch black. I shouted for Frank at the top of my lungs, and in a speedy time he ran to the room, turned on the light, only to find Jack in my bed, holding a handful of my hair. "It's not what it looks like, bud," he said. "I was only smelling it." I was sleeping facing the door, so I could see Frank, and I dared not look behind me to see Jack. But his voice sounded like that of a child who knows he's done something wrong and is about to get into trouble. Frank lost it, told him to get the hell downstairs. My cousin apologized a lot, but said he did not want to kick him out of the house in the drugged up state he was in. The door had no lock, so my cousin slept in a chair in front of the bedroom door. Jack actually tried to come in again. I woke up to Frank telling him to get the hell back downstairs or we would kick him out the house. The next day he was gone by the time I got up. But a few days later, when Frank tracked Jack down, he was told he'd been mixing drugs with alcohol and was embarrassed by his behavior. Even though it's been years since it happened, it still gives me the creeps to think about. Big, deep, slow inhales, and it gives me goosebumps. The band broke up not long after that, so I never had to meet him again. I was told he was a good guy, so maybe the drugs made him super strange. I'm just glad Frank was there, or who knows what he would have done to me.
I'm a 19-year-old male, and I live in a small college town. I'm very exceptionally small for a guy. I look about 16, and am gay, have pink hair, piercings, and usually wear painted nails. These facts matter, because I'm assuming it's the reason this happened to me. Why this man even noticed. Let me take you back. A few days ago, about 7 in the morning, I was at the grocery store, trying to avoid the crowds. You know, COVID. The store was mostly empty, and I was just wandering up and down the aisles doing my shopping. While I was doing so, a man who appeared to be about the age of my dad walked up behind me. He grabbed me by the shoulder with one hand and by the butt in the other. I was wearing a slightly cropped shirt and a slightly small pair of shorts, which I maybe wouldn't have worn in a lot of places, but I felt like my town was safe, given it was mostly other college kids who were fairly progressive. I suppose the clothing choice may have been why I stood out as well. I guess I keep mentioning this because I partially blame myself, even though I know I shouldn't. Anyway, he grabbed me and I immediately jumped out of my skin, craned away from him as hard as I could, and gave him what I assumed was a horrified look, and rapidly scurried away. I actually left the grocery store and went straight to my car, and decided I would go to another grocery store about a 5-minute drive away to do my shopping instead, and felt more relaxed to do it there. When I stepped outside the doors of the grocery store, though, my heart dropped to the pit of my stomach. The same creepy man from the previous grocery store who had grabbed me was waiting outside it. I immediately panicked and reached for my short pocket knife, which regrettably wasn't in my pocket. No one else was in the parking lot, because it was still very early, and the store had just opened. The man then came over, approached me, and said he was sorry to bother me, and he didn't mean to offend me, but he just wanted to tell me I was very attractive, and was wondering if I could talk to him about it in his car. I said no, in an extremely panicky voice. He attempted to reassure me so that I wouldn't be afraid. I was terrified he was going to kidnap me. In the time it took me to get my door unlocked, it was either the grocery store for help or my car. I was so filled with panic and felt so exposed and afraid that all of a sudden I just wanted to leave. So I decided to run for my car even if there was a risk. I ran around him because he was between me and the parking lot, running right by him, so close I was terrified he'd grab me, but he didn't. I ran as fast as I could, unlocked it as fast as I could, jumped inside and drove away. I drove around a while before going home, keeping an eye out if I could spot someone following me, but couldn't. After about an hour of driving around the town, trying to get rid of the bad feeling of being followed, I went home and locked myself in my apartment. I haven't felt too comfortable to go shopping alone without my boyfriend since, and haven't felt comfortable to wear shorts or crop tops outside the house either. Not that I should have to feel that way, but it is just how I feel now. Moral of the story for me was to never forget the knife at home, and if someone does anything weird like that, it might be a good idea to keep an eye out to make sure you aren't being followed. I'm a nurse. My orientation tonight included all the spooky stories. There were 2 travel nurses that worked in L&D that decided to drive out of town to Vegas or Austin. Unfortunately, they had a really bad accident, and one of them died. The night she died, there was a loud scream heard through the hospital. It was so loud that the nurses checked room by room in multiple units to see where it came from. A day or 2 later, everyone found out about the death. The time of the accident was the same time that everyone heard the scream. Another story was our PEDS floor. We overflow there when P&P and L&D is full. Every department has the isolation room, which has the anteroom separated by the solid door and then a door with a window. A patient reported to her nurse that there was a young girl who kept staring at them through the door window. She even entered and went to the bathroom to sit in the tub. Finally, the last story. Doing stairs is a good way to get some exercise and keep you awake. We have 7 floors, so not too bad. Unfortunately, sometimes you just get the bad feeling when using the stairs in the middle of the night. Sometimes it feels like someone is in the stairs with you. You could even occasionally hear noises. So stairs are avoided now at night. In that same vein, sometimes the elevator will stop on our floor and open if someone pressed the button, but there's no one inside, and no one pressed the button. During my younger years, I worked as an ME's assistant in a small town out in the boonies. We had little to do, mostly car accidents, the odd workplace death, once or twice a suicide, and of course anyone dying in medical care because that's the law. As death professionals, we were the least superstitious people on the planet. We knew that dead people are dead. We don't have the usual fear of dead bodies and gore, and those who come to us as fresh new employees shed whatever fears they have and move on quickly. One evening we receive a freshly deceased male in his late 50s. The man had been hauling freight from Galveston up into the heartland on an 18-wheeler, apparently done his body no service with a mix of trucker speed, smokes, fatty diner food, and beer by the barrel, and one night it just all caved in on him, leading to the cleaning staff of the motel he'd been staying at to find him when he didn't check out. The autopsy had already been done a few days ago. The cause of death was determined, and he'd been moved to one of the walk-in coolers we used to store bodies for transport home. They walk in with this big industrial cooler that they use in restaurants or warehouses with those rubber curtains and a massive lockable door. I grabbed the key from the ring to tag the body and bag it for transport. We bagged every body back then, because Southwestern Airlines was our main air transport, and they didn't have the pressure boxes bodies get put into to prevent seepages. The pickup worker was on his way, and I had 30 minutes to get everything done. Paperwork, tagging, double-checking we had the right person, all that. With the medical examiner's papers in hand, I went to bag our trucker, opened the door, slid his metal slab onto the cart, and wheeled him into the autopsy anteroom, and pulled the bag onto him. There's a science to doing this alone. Humans are freaking unwieldy and heavy. After putting him in and readjusting his slipped face, as many of you may be unaware, the medical examiner makes an incision around the back of the head and pulls all the flesh down from the cranium to open up the skull and inspect the brain. Nice. I zipped the bag shut and went to grab the outer tag I'd printed beforehand. One-use body bags have a double zipper, one at the bottom, one at the top. When a body is moved, no matter where, The mover has to check the name and number on the paperwork with the name and number on the bag and the name and number on the toe tag. I left the room, and when I came back to the top, the bag was standing open, exposing the trucker's face, with the slipped face and his jaw ajar, as it would be when all muscular function is gone. He looked like he gave me a crooked smile. I zipped the bag shut, scolded myself for not doing my job right, checked paperwork against the toe and the new tag, and zipped the bottom shut after checking, placing the tag and wheeling him back. A little later, the driver arrived. I handed her a cup of coffee and the paperwork and went to fetch the body. When I opened the cooler, the trucker smiled at me again. Had I pulled the bottom zipper too wide and the top one open? I did the whole check all tags and paperwork thing, closed the face part and wheeled him out. We sat in the break room for a few minutes while the driver finished her coffee, talked about the Rams and the disastrous Cowboy game a few days back, and she walked out. "Dude, you sure you're done with him?" I heard her holler. As she was outside and standing at the entrance of the room, I went over to her. The bag had opened again. A toothy, crooked grin was staring right at us. I knew for a fact I'd closed the bag. The scientist in me says it was a faulty bag with tension issues. The rest of me? Yeah, I'm not too sure. This happened to my wife. We were asleep and it was 3 a.m. in the middle of summer, when she wakes up to banging on the metal screen door up front. She goes to check it out and it's a child, maybe 9. This kid is in some underwear banging on the door. My wife answers it and he asks if he can come in. Then some tweaker lady comes walking down the street and calls this kid's name, sees him and calls him out. He just walks down the stairs and they keep walking down the street. She was really mad that I didn't wake up. I hope it wasn't a kid escaping from his kidnappers or some sort of abusive family. I work LTC on a dementia unit. We had a resident who was our baby. She had been a don of a nursing home and would stay up until midnight with us talking about work, asking about med pass, etc. She was always a nurse at heart. She got really bad and ended up in bed in about August. She wouldn't eat nor drink. I think maybe she took 360 cc a day for the first week. Eventually nothing. It took her nearly 4 weeks of nothing to finally pass. I took a week's vacation on week 3. I said my final goodbyes, came back, still kicking. I couldn't believe it. She passed in September. So since she had passed, we have had 2 patients in her room. One was a lady who had a stroke, rehabbed to home. Pretty with it, and she would turn on her call light and whisper, "There's a lady in my bed." We would reassure her, show her the empty bed, and this went on her entire stay. She kept seeing a lady in her bed. One of her last nights, she rings crying, "There's a lady in my room. I know you don't believe me, but it's true. You don't want to believe me." Patient number 2 still resides in that room, an older gentleman with dementia. He rings every so often saying there's a lady in his bed, or a lady in his room. I bet it's got to be our cute old Don resident. I'm a nurse that works in an intensive care unit. I took care of a patient who had a history of esophageal cancer. A while back he had a surgery and got better, and eventually went home. Months later he got pneumonia and came back to the hospital in respiratory distress. He had to be put on a mechanical ventilator. He was stable, no blood pressure issues, heart rhythm looked great, breathing wasn't terrible, responsive and following commands. When all of a sudden his blood pressure suddenly drops and he lost his pulse. We called a code blue and began CPR. We brought him back after an hour and continued to run tests to figure out why he crashed. None of the results of the labs or imaging were remarkable. 15 minutes after we had brought him back, his blood pressure drops again and he lost pulse. We continued coding him for another hour until it was clear he couldn't be brought back, and the doctor pronounced him dead. His wife came in after the fact. She told me she couldn't stop thinking about the conversation her and her husband had. Wife: honey, don't forget you've got an appointment with the home health nurse this Saturday. Husband: well, I won't be here this Saturday. What do you mean you won't be here this Saturday? Where are you going? Oh, I don't know. I just won't be here. This conversation happened on Wednesday. He was admitted to the hospital Thursday and he died on Friday at 11:30 p.m.
This happened to me almost 2 years ago, in early June of 2020. I was just going over to my friend's house, Anna and Lonnie. They were sisters that lived together, and it was only a 2-minute drive away, so I was always welcome. When I walked inside of their house, I noticed their mum's boyfriend, John, and a man I didn't recognize standing in her kitchen. She told me it was John's foster brother, Matt. I was introduced and went over to the kitchen chairs to talk about whatever we did at the time. He was marginally attractive, but nothing more than that. I would notice that Matt would occasionally look at me while my friends and I were talking. I didn't think much of that, so I brushed it off, and we later moved to another room to hang out for a few hours until I went home. Fast forward a few months. I was going to ask my 2 friends if they wanted to hang out, but my friend Anna told me that she was going to Texas with John and Matt to help move a neighbor's belongings, and wouldn't be back for a week. So I decided I would still hang out with Lonnie until Anna came back from Texas. When she came back, this is where everything started getting weird. One morning, I noticed I got a message sent from an email address rather than a phone number. Out of curiosity, I decided to open the message and read it. It was John's brother Matt, and him telling me that he got my number from Anna and was hoping it was okay. I personally was a bit confused as to why Anna gave him my number and figured I'd ask her about it later, since I was planning to hang out with her as she was back. A few hours after being back at their house, I asked her why she had given Matt my number. This is when I noticed she looked a bit nervous. I told her I wasn't angry with her, and that I just wanted to know why. She said that she needed to tell me something, and I was confused. Apparently the entire time, to and from Texas, Matt would ask lots of questions about me whenever John would get out of the car to get gas, then immediately stop the moment he returned. When he had asked me if he could get my number and if I had a boyfriend, she told him that I did have a boyfriend and did not try anything, but that she probably wouldn't mind regarding the number. So, she gave it over, albeit somewhat reluctantly. I felt extremely weirded out. Mind you, this man is in his 30s while I'm only 18. I met my current boyfriend in July of 2020 and started dating him in August. This is just for clarification's sake. I didn't want to ruin the mood, so we just dropped it and went on with our day. For the next 3 months, Matt would text at the most random times ever. At first I didn't mind, but over time it would be consistent messages, and when I wouldn't respond within minutes, he would text me every 4 to 5 minutes, and if I still wouldn't have responded, well, it wouldn't go well. Basically, it would be him texting me 99% of the time. He would tell me how much he liked my style, and that he was too nervous to ask for my number when we first met. He would constantly ask me to FaceTime him, or meet up with him because he was a really chill guy and wanted to get to know me. Of course, I would respectfully decline. I didn't feel comfortable meeting up or speaking with this guy on the phone that I'd only met once. I didn't mention that my boyfriend wouldn't like it, since Anna had already told him that I had a boyfriend. So, I thought he would have taken a hint. One time he asked if I was available to talk, So I said, "Sure, what's up?" I noticed that my message was sent but not delivered, so I figured it was a problem on his end. Next day, he later sent me a message of his response getting offended, saying, "Your silence is confirmation of what I've been hearing was true." It's cool. I got the answer I needed. I didn't even see his message come in. 5 days went by, and he sent another message saying, "Your response barely came in this morning. Must not have been delivered from your end." Which was strange, as I knew it had been. I was in my house, which had a decent Wi-Fi. I didn't feel like communicating with him, so I just never responded and left it alone. Fast forward to Valentine's Day. I was out with my boyfriend and just spending quality time at the mall, having fun, when I heard a text notification ring on my phone, and I noticed that I got a message from Matt. The message contained a GIF with hearts saying Happy Valentine's Day. Now by this time, my boyfriend knew the whole story, so I thought it would be funny of my boyfriend to send a picture of himself saying, "Happy Valentine's Day back," and he did. Matt responded, saying he had actually sent that to every woman in his contact book. And if I had a problem with it, I could have just ignored the message, and that he couldn't wait to tell his army buddies about this, and that he should post the picture of my boyfriend online. Now we both know he was extremely defensive, and overall acting childish. So my boyfriend texted Matt on how weird it was for a 30-year-old man to be texting an 18-year-old, and he repeatedly asked to stop contacting me. Then Matt would just make military jokes to my boyfriend about how he's in the Marines and Matt was in the army, comparing the two, irrelevant stuff. So me noticing the conversation getting nowhere and I getting fed up, I grabbed my phone back and just told Matt sternly to never contact me again. By that point, he was just making rumors on how to talk to another dude in the military, and it never worked out. Just making an arse out of himself, really. I didn't care if he was upset. I have a boyfriend, and he was the one who got upset in the first place. I just switched off my phone. I wanted to have a good time. So, the day after Valentine's Day, I received 2 extremely long messages from Matt on how he was disappointed with me. I never mentioned that I had a boyfriend to him, which in either case wasn't his business. How he never would have reached out to me if he knew I wasn't of age. Or, the most disturbing thing of all, how he would have shown up at my house confronting me about this and how embarrassing it would be for me. I have to say I never told him where I lived, nor did my friends, because I told them not to mention anything about me to him because I began feeling uncomfortable around him. And if somehow he did find my address, I would have had my dad open the door and speak to him himself. My dad was a sheriff, ex-army veteran who served in Vietnam. He's really strong for his age too. If this guy tried anything, I don't think he'd have had a chance. I never responded after this and told my friends and parents everything that happened, and they told Matt he couldn't move into their house since he planned on moving in with them for a few months. I never heard anything else about him, nor received a message from him, and I hope I never do.
The lady in 606 hated the TV on in her room. She lived there for years and would yell at roomies that turned their TV on. She would also fall asleep holding the button on her call bell to just annoy us. One day she dies in the middle of the night while I'm not there, and the nurse on duty at the other station reported the automatic front doors opening for no reason. It was later discovered that this was moments after her death. There is a low census, so her room remains empty. Nursing assistants would frequently go into 606 and watch TV on their breaks. They reported that the TV would frequently turn off for no reason as they watched it. Her call bell would go off without anyone being in the room for months after her death. This was an old building with faulty wiring, but nonetheless, was still very creepy. I work in long-term care, and we have tons of stories. I'll give you two of my favorite ones. We had a woman in our assisted living unit. She was a very sweet lady with dementia who could never understand how to use her call light for assistance. So every night, she would meander over to her neighbor's apartment and ask him to get someone to help her get ready for bed. He would then put on his call light and tell whomever came that the lady needed help. The man is still with us, and he has no cognitive deficits or memory problems. He's here because of severe kidney issues and can't manage all of his tubes and medication. The lady became ill with pancreas issues and stopped knocking on the man's door for about a month. She sadly passed away one evening at 4 p.m. And at approximately 7 that night, while the family was still in the lady's room with her, the man put on his call light and said that the lady was ready for bed. Creepy, right? The CNA figured he was just picking up an old routine, so she asked him, "She came here?" He went on to explain that she must have snuck in the door because he didn't hear her knock. She was wearing a white robe and holding her rosary beads. The CNA told me all of this, and I, being a huge skeptic, didn't believe it. He must have been dreaming. The family finally left, and when the funeral home director arrived to take the body, I went out with him to help move her onto the cart. We walk into the room, and there she was laying in bed, white gown, rosary beads in hand. The neighbor still occasionally puts on his light for her. The second story. The building I work in sits on the same site as the old nursing home in town. It was bought out by a non-profit, torn down, and rebuilt into the building I work in now. The old building had a very friendly lady that worked in the kitchen as a cook. She worked there until she retired, and a few years later she had a stroke and came to live in the new building. She had vascular dementia pretty badly and would find her way into the kitchen all the time. We had to guide her back to her room. She died about a year ago. Ever since she passed, strange things would happen in this kitchen. You can hear fridge doors open and slam closed. You can hear water running and things falling. I've watched the light turn on and off, and there were always cold spots in the kitchen, in different spots every night. One night took the cake though. A CNA was in the kitchen getting chips to stock when she said the walk-in freezer door came open and she watched a dark, smoke-like outline walk out, stop, turn to her, wave, and disappear. She didn't go back into the kitchen after that. I offered her $100 once, and she point-blank refused. Bonus story. My wife was pregnant, and we had our C-section scheduled early because she has polyhydramnios, and our son was measuring 11 pounds at 36 weeks. Holy huge alien baby. He was only born 10 pounds though. The hospital we decided on was only 2 blocks away from our house, but very old and very institutional looking. The OB unit was one very long hallway with rooms on either side and a nurse's station in the middle. Our son was born, and we spent the next 3 days in the unit. Where we came up to the unit, we noticed another couple was in one of the birthing suites at the opposite end of the hallway from us. We heard that babies crying every day at completely appropriate intervals for the duration of our stay. It would cry for 3 to 4 minutes every 1 to 2 hours like clockwork. When we were being discharged home, we asked the nurse if the other couple on the unit had a boy or girl. The nurse gave us a puzzled look and told us that we were the only couple on the unit. The other couple was discharged before our son was born. We're going to another hospital if we have another child. Okay, another bonus. My wife has had 2 miscarriages since our son was born. This last Christmas Day we took our son to the site of the cemetery where the unborn babies are buried. It had just snowed the night before, so the whole ground was covered with fresh snow. We couldn't even drive into the cemetery yet because it hadn't been plowed, so we parked on the road. This is a very rural cemetery with maybe 100 plots. When we walked into the cemetery, there was a single set of very small footprints, a child's for sure, that led through the gate and weaved through the gravestones directly to the spot where our babies were buried and stopped. The prints did not turn around or go back or lead anywhere else in the cemetery. They simply walked to that burial spot and stopped. The second we got to the spot that our babies are buried at, it started to snow the biggest, most beautiful snowflakes I've ever seen. We said a little prayer, my wife cried a little, and we walked back to the truck. It stopped snowing again by the time we got back to the truck. Crazy. When I was about 15, I had to get in some volunteer time to look good for college apps down the road. My family has a bunch of doctors and nurses, so I was shuffled pretty quickly into volunteering at the Utah University Hospital. I was a flower girl. Essentially, I trucked around the hospital and delivered flowers to patients. I believe it was floor 5 at the point, but it was the psych ward. Oftentimes, families wouldn't know why their loved one was in the hospital if they were in the psych ward, so would send flowers. I don't think many of the patients were allowed them because I had to deliver them to the front desk and not to the rooms. I'd have to wait at the desk so the nurse could double check the patient was there. So a few weeks into working, I'm doing my rounds, and there are a lot of flowers for the psych ward this time. So I go and deliver and wait for the nurses to double check everything. As I'm waiting, this bearded old dude with the creepiest smile I've ever seen is wheeled in from somewhere else in the hospital, with an escort that had a gun. The patient looks directly at me and we lock eyes. He politely asks me if I know God. Before we lost eye contact, I turn around and the nurses are all pale and hellish and rush me out of there as soon as possible. Found it weird until I saw his face later again that night on the TV during news. Dude was the guy who had kidnapped Elizabeth Smart, and while I am not the stereotypical platinum blonde Mormon girl, I'm a skinny mini with dirty blonde hair and blue eyes, so I'm sure he was more than happy to see me. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I had an experience a few months ago which gives me doubt. It was about 2 a.m, and I was sitting alone at the desk charting. In my peripheral vision, I saw a lady standing at the desk and I jumped a little. I looked over and there was just a vase with flowers. A few minutes later, it happened again, and I figured that the flowers were just messing with my tired brain. So I moved them behind a desk. A few minutes later, though, I jump again, because I swear I saw a figure standing there out of the corner of my eye. I just thought I was tired and on edge. But then one of the aides walks down the hall and rounds the corner and gasps. She says, "I just saw a woman standing there, but she's now gone." So that was strange. There's an old story from that unit about how during a change of shift, a patient flatlined on the telemonitor and everyone ran into the room. The patient was unresponsive and barely had a palpable pulse. Turns out her glucose was less than 20. They straightened her out, and once everything was settled, they realized the patient was not in the telemonitor and had never even had the telly on. So I had this patient, mid-30s, female, perfectly healthy. We get chatting and I learn a little bit about her. She had just moved in with her fiancé. According to this fiancé, their new house was 100% movie haunted. Stuff being moved and missing, doors slamming shut, strange sounds at night, the works. He came home one day from work and found her crying in front of the bathroom mirror. He asked her why she was so upset, and she said she couldn't remember, just that she felt tired and wanted to go to bed. When she woke up, she said she couldn't breathe, so he took her to the ER. One emergency surgery, an ICU stay later, I transfer her to telemetry. Well, when we transferred her to the floor, The first thing she did was ask them to cover up the mirror. The way their rooms are set up is that the bed is on one end, and at the opposite end of the bed is the dresser/sink/mirror. If you sat up straight in bed, you could see yourself in the mirror, and it makes a lot of patients uncomfortable and is not that uncommon of a request. So we happily taped a bedsheet up and left. The story goes that one morning, the tech bathed her and got her up into the chair. They do baths very early in the morning, so the patient must have fallen asleep in the recliner. The tech left to get extra sheets to cover the mirror, but got distracted and forgot all about leaving the woman in the room alone with the uncovered mirror. Well, the call bell goes off a little while later, and after realizing her slip, the tech goes to grab a sheet. When she entered the room, she found to her horror that the woman was dead on the floor with her test tube ripped out. I am a nurse and generally work night shift, although I've never experienced any weirdness. And come to think of it, I did work on an ex-tuberculosis wing. Before I worked at that hospital, I worked at an Alzheimer's facility. We had a patient that passed away, and I had a co-worker tell me that alarms would go off, the doors would slam, lights, you name it. So one night I go down that wing. The only patient in it had been the one that had passed, and it was built a few months prior. I'm restocking and the lights turn out, and a door slams. I come out angry and head back to the nurse's station to find the girls had no idea, but they told me so. I called a friend that had been sensitive to that stuff and asked to come and just walk around with me. She came and I gave her no context. I just told her it was weird. She walked through the entire building and came up to the very room that had been haunted, and she nailed it down to a T. She explained the person who didn't like that her chair was missing. She meant no harm and just felt very territorial to the room. The girls at the nurse's station were ecstatic. They weren't crazy and were ecstatic. It was the only patient that had been in that room, and as I walked, my friend, she pointed out to the windows so that I could see the girls where the nurses were at the station, and then pointed to the room on the far side of the facility where there was a light on in the room we had just left, and there was a clear silhouette in the window. Still makes me weirded out in a good way. Now, back to work in the freaking hospital. We also have a tunnel system and scary Silent Hill Hall rooms with archaic medieval devices. Why has nothing even remotely spooky happened to me is baffling. The details my friend gave were a woman with short hair in her 80s named Cleo. And as for my friend being sensitive to stuff, she's always had weird reactions, like if sensing something can walk into a room and will break out in hives almost instantly. I had lived in a house where she had spent nights over multiple times and never a problem, and I removed my nana's hope chest out, and on that particular occasion I just felt weird stuff happen over the weekend. Tarot cards spiraled on the floor, candles aligned in bookshelves, etc. She came over, barely stepped in, broke out in the rash, and told me she wasn't welcome. Before we got to my room, she asked me what I took out of the house, and that I shouldn't have played with my tarot deck I picked up. I told her that I'd got some tarot cards and had been playing them for about a week. In the process of this, a bunch of coats and hangers came down from my makeshift closet on top of her. She left, told me she wasn't welcome, and told me to bring whatever was taken out back immediately. And to this day I still have my nana's chest in my bedroom. I've had a pretty traumatizing death happen in a room. My first code. Nothing we could have done. For a few weeks I got a creepy feeling like I was being watched around that room. Cut to now 3 months later, and that room is empty, and I need to use the computer since the others are taken. We walk in, and then I literally yelped and jumped because I thought I saw someone sitting in the recliner in the room. Then, as I was charting, I kept feeling like someone was behind me watching me. So I leave, talk to my coworkers, and we stupidly decide to download ghost radar apps, which I know are not anything reliable, but 3 separate apps all picked up an entity in the room, when they didn't pick it up anywhere else. One picked out the word wish, and then another picked up a form outside the door that looked like it was looking at me. I don't normally believe in ghosts, I'm not religious, but after this night I felt so scared and like I needed to go to church. Others have had patients tell me they feel a dark presence in a room where someone has died. Call lights go off. When there aren't patients, a lady in white is often seen on camera, but the nurses never see her even though they're right in front of them. Lots of scary stories. It's a surgery center, so people aren't expected to die. But it does leave a lot of bad juju when it does happen. About a month ago, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I took a high walk to the local McDonald's. I had almost reached the restaurant when I suddenly felt a bug zoom into my left ear hole. In panic, I stuck my index finger into my ear trying to grab the bug. Unfortunately, I think it just pushed it in further. I walked into the McDonald's bathroom and looked into the mirror, but I couldn't see the bug in my ear at all. I could feel it though, and needless to say I was thoroughly distressed at this point. I found the fortitude to complete my McDonald's mission, order 4 McDoubles, 2 McChickens and a large fry, and while waiting for my food I called my mum and asked her for advice. She told me to shake my head and let gravity do the work. So there I was standing in the McDonald's, sweating and jerking my head from side to side, looking a little bit schizophrenic or like a crackhead. This did not work. If anything, it made the matters worse because it agitated the bug. I could feel/hear it moving inside and it was terrifying. Whatever it was moved on its legs and I could hear a loud rustling, and there was a pain and pressure in my left ear canal that has since gone unmatched. After getting my food, I hurried back to my friend's apartment. I told them about my plight. Most of them were stoned and just laughed it off. It's not a big deal, bro, it'll come out eventually. My friend Max looked up what to do with a bug in your ear. We tried the first solution, which involved turning off all the lights in the room and shining a bright light near my ear, but that proved ineffective. About an hour later, the bug was still very much alive and very much still in my ear. Every time it moved and I heard the rustling, I would twitch involuntarily. I finally gave in and agreed to try the second method the internet suggested, pouring oil down the ear canal to try and flush it out. I took a knee on the kitchen linoleum and let Irene pour a little olive oil in my ear. When the olive oil went in, the bug began squirming like never before, I think because it was drowning. This, combined with the discomfort of oil draining into my ear, was about all I could bear. I let the oil flow down with my head cocked to the side for about 10 seconds, bellowing in agony for a while, then stood up and tilted my head back to the left, and the bug finally flowed out. The feeling of relief that washed over me at that moment was indescribable. It almost made this whole ordeal worth it. My friends were shocked to see the bug, a sizable black beetle with a hard exoskeleton. I don't have a picture, regrettably, but I'm so glad it didn't lay eggs in there or cause damage to my ear. It is by far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my life. By far. I work night shift on a medical/oncology unit, where it's not uncommon to have hospice patients. Back when I was working as a CNA, I used to hang out at the back nurses' station near the oncology rooms and study for the NCLEX on slow nights. One extremely slow night, when the oncology rooms were all empty, I heard a clicking sound while I was reading. When patients are using a walker incorrectly, it makes a distinct sound against the tile, and the cadence matches that of someone walking. I look up to see which of the medical patients was awake and walking around, only to see no one there. I get up to investigate. I approach the first two rooms, and the clicking sound is definitely not coming from there. As I approach the doorway of the third room, the clicking sound gets closer, and when I get to the doorway, the clicking stops. I give up my search and return to studying. A few minutes later, the clicks resume, and I reapproach the door to the third room, and it stops again. I head back to my studies, and the clicking resumes, and before I can even sit down, I decide to check the rest of the rooms, rather than trying the third room again. The clicking continues. I'm reapproaching the third room, the clicking stops. At this point, I'm feeling a bit creeped out, and I'm just assuming my mind is playing tricks on me. I decide to head up to the front of the unit where the nurses are chatting, and think nothing more of it until a few nights later. A few nights after the event, my unit was having a particularly busy night. The other CNAs, as I was still prepping for the NCLX at the time, was pulled into a one-to-one about an hour into the shift, and all the nurses were maxed out at 7 patients. I was the only aide on the floor, and the nurses were trying to get their 9 PM med pass done, first and largest med pass of the shift. Needless to say, it was crazy. Of course, the family of a confused patient chooses then to leave for the night, causing abuela, or grandma, to sundown hard. Every 5 minutes she's setting off the bed alarm, and she's too unsteady to be up without assistance. She's too confused to use a walker, and she's trying to clean the house, so she's moving in ways that are making her more likely to fall. After a few hours of this and several calls to the doctor by the nurse, charge nurse, and house officer, the patient is put on one-to-one. Both CNAs are now sitting with confused patients, and the nurses are maxed out. At this point, it's about midnight. The nurses are either charting or working on their midnight med pass. The room I'm sitting in is close enough to the nurse's station that I can hear the call light system at any time the patient calls. While Abuela is continuing on with her confused behavior, I hear a bathroom alarm ring on the call light system. When a patient pushes the call button, the system beeps once about every 1 to 2 seconds. When the patient pulls the bathroom cord for assistance getting off the toilet, the system beeps 4 times a second. The majority of patient falls occur in the bathroom, hence the more annoying sound to direct priority. The bathroom alarm is continuing to ring and ring. Why the hell aren't the nurses answering the call light, I ask myself. Where the hell are they? The nurses are carrying portable phones, roughly the size of an old Nokia, just not as durable, which ring with the call lights. Are the phones not working? Sometimes it happens. What feels like 15 minutes later, the bathroom alarm is still ringing, and at this point I'm surprised there hasn't been a code 4 announced. Finally, the nurse comes into the room and I tell her that I'll go back. As long as I'm out the room, the nurses can't leave, so the patient can still be safe. As soon as I step out of the room, I realize that I'm not hearing the call light system. I'm hearing a telephone in one of the patient's rooms, loudly. It's not a ring like a pickup ring, but rather a non-stop ring. One that I've never heard these kind of phones do before nor since. The ring is coming from the opposite direction of the nurse's station. It's coming from down the hall in the oncology room. Not just any room, but the furthest room. I begin heading towards the sound, and as I get to the oncology rooms, they're all dark and absent of patients. As I approach the room in question, I can see the phone light up as it continues its drawn-out ring. As I step out the room, I feel a shiver go down my spine, and I physically shudder. I've never felt this feeling before. As I walk across the room, I feel someone staring at the back of my head. It feels as though someone is pouring out every ounce of hatred and rage into that stare. Words cannot do justice to explain the feelings directed at me. As I walk around the empty bed, I pick up my pace. I pick up the phone and slam it down and run out the room. As soon as I cross the threshold, I feel physically relieved. No hatred or rage being directed at me. I quickly walked back to Abuela's room and let the nurse finish her med pass. This unfortunately was not the last time I had to deal with this ghost. Occasionally, when I have to go into that room to grab extra equipment or a chair, I can feel the angry presence. Luckily, the ghost is usually pretty dormant whenever there's a patient in the room. Not always, but usually. I've had a few patients complain about not being able to sleep or relax in that room in particular, or they would complain about nightmares. Once, and thankfully only once, the malevolence could even be felt during the day. On a few occasions, I've sent co-workers into the room for various reasons and then asked them about it afterwards. Most of them have agreed that something doesn't feel quite right in there. My great-grandmother and her two sisters were very close. In fact, they passed away in the same year, in the exact same order of birth. Aunt Mary, Grandmother June, and Aunt Sally. Well, right before Aunt Sally died, we went to visit her in the nursing home. She was pretty far gone, having late-stage Alzheimer's, so she had been bedridden and unable to speak for 2 or 3 years. We did our usual visit of sitting and talking to her. We stayed about 2 hours, then left. We get a call the next day from her nurse to tell us that she had passed in the night, but told us something strange. She said that she went to check on her around 1 in the morning, but as she got to the door, she heard my aunt speaking, saying, "Mary, do I look okay? What do you think, June? Am I ready?" But when she went in, Aunt Sally was still laying in the bed, but she had a soft smile on her face. Her nurse came back in 2 hours later, and she had passed. I was working on a research project during college to determine the residual feed intake for a group of heifers from a massive farm in Georgia. I was just hired help, so I didn't do much with the data. My job was to sort heifers into the sweep tub, which is basically a big gate that we use to push cattle into a chute, one animal at a time, so they can be treated for disease and injuries or just to be weighed. Every 2 weeks, we'd weigh these heifers, and I would sort out groups of 4 to 5 out of 12 to go into the sweep tub, close the gate behind them, and get them to go into the chute. One day, about a week before Valentine, I was running the sweep tub again, and had to get a heifer out of the corner and into the sweep. She decided to do a 180, and the next thing I know, the head of an 800-pound animal is hitting me in the chest. My ass is pinned against the gate, and her hood is coming down right on my crotch. After making a male nurse uncomfortable with my story, the doctor said I was lucky, because the wound was in the best place possible. The only downside was that I wouldn't be able to celebrate Valentine's Day the fun way. Basically, a heifer almost made me a eunuch. I used to work in downtown Detroit. This was my first job. My old unit used to be a children's ward back in the early 1900s, and there are numerous reports of people seeing a little girl running around. At 2 a.m, one of my IV pumps starts beeping, so I go into the first room and find that for some odd reason, it had infiltrated. As I'm placing a new IV, I notice that my patient is staring hard into the corner of the room. He finally asks me, "What's that little girl doing on the ceiling?" I literally thought I was going to lose my mind. I walked out of the room, and as I'm telling my co-worker about the creepy experience, the IV pump in the room right next door starts going off. Walk in to find her IV had gone bad too. This woman had severe dementia, and would just talk a whole bunch of gibberish, like no real words. It just sounded like mumbles. So right as I'm about to put her IV in, she goes, "See the little girl? See the little girl? Where's the babysitter?" Seriously, so done. I just wanted to walk off the unit and never come back. About 2 years ago, my then girlfriend and I were in a pretty severe car accident. We both had concussions and whatnot. It was crazy. While we were there, which was a few hours at least, I saw what must have been a homeless brawl gone horribly wrong, or right, depending on perspective. One of the guys literally had a broken beer bottle lodged into the side of his skull, and was very badly cut all over. It was hard to grasp the whole situation, because his whole face/skull was covered in blood, and he was screaming. It took several police officers to hold him down while the doctors gave him what I assume were sedatives. The other homeless guy came in another ambulance a few minutes later, with 2 gunshot wounds, according to the police officer I overheard. I didn't see much of him, but I knew he was alive because he was babbling incoherently as he was carted in. Anyway, this is probably business as usual in the ER, but none of my other visits there in my life were nearly as dramatic as what I experienced that night. I'm not one that believes in ghosts, but some of these stories I've heard about haunted rooms and units come from reliable sources, and once from my own. When I was a nurse assistant, we had 73 on the ortho floor that was haunted by a small child. On numerous occasions, patients in this room would hit the call light and ask us to get these kids out my room. One night a patient called out and asked me to shut his door because there were kids laughing in the hallway. It was the middle of the night and no kids were on the floor. I just apologized and shut the door. 10 minutes later, he calls and asks us to get the little girl in his room out because she was at the foot of his bed. I went in there and he said that she was gone, but that she'd been staring at him. These things happened several times over my 3 years working there. The second story I never actually witnessed, but has actual interactions with ghosts and spirits/patients. I was working at the hospital in the south that has 2 ICUs. The one on the 3rd floor was basically an overflow where the main unit got full but had 8 beds in it. Supposedly a nurse that had worked in the hospital a long time ago had died in room 2. Kind of a catty corner, the desk and difficult to actually see in while sitting at the desk. One night a nurse was chatting and out of the corner of her eye, she saw another nurse walk into that room. She got curious after a few minutes because the room was empty, and she assumed someone went in there and got cords or something. She gets up and goes in, but there's no one in the room. In the same room, a nurse went in early in the morning to do some dressing changes on a patient. The patient was AO times 4, and completely with it, but was confused as to why the nurse was doing dressing changes. The patient stated, "There was another nurse in here 10 minutes ago that changed my dressing." Thinking it was the other nurse in the unit that night as there were only 2, she went ahead and thanked the other nurse. The other nurse said she hadn't changed any dressings and had been doing something with her patient for several minutes. Other smaller stories happened, but they always took place in room 2 when there were only 2 nurses working that unit. At times throughout my life, I've had things mysteriously vanish, only to turn up days or even months later with no explanation as to where they've been or how they've reappeared. It's been a few years since anything like this has happened to me, until recently. For context, I'm a backpacker in Australia, and in March of this year I headed to Kangaroo Island to volunteer in bushfire-affected areas with an organisation called Blaze Aid. While there, I lived in a tent in their makeshift campsite, which was actually the local cricket club ground. My tent was a last-minute purchase, and I'd originally been told that they would have a spare tent that I could use, and then the day before arriving to camp, I was told I would need to buy one, which resulted in me having to buy the only affordable tent left in stock in Adelaide's Target, at a $39 TP tent that slept 4 people. This tent, although pretty terrible quality, was spacious and allowed me to spread out all of my belongings. Bear in mind I live out of a few backpacks, so it was nice to have a floor drobe for once. As coronavirus became an issue in the rest of the world, We were isolated from all of it on that small island, but we were told as interstate borders were shutting down, the future of camp was uncertain. If we have somewhere safe to go, we should leave. I had met a fellow volunteer, and he had offered me his spare room in his house in the city, and I decided to take him up on the offer to have somewhere safe and warm to wait out the pandemic until I could get home. Lol. 2 days before leaving camp, it was a sunny, warm day, so the camp coordinators organized a barbecue for everyone, and we set up one long table outside in the sun. My friend and I got there a little later than everyone else, and the only seats left were on the side facing the sun, so we both agreed to go and grab our sunglasses so that we could actually enjoy the meal and talk to those sat opposite us. We ran to our tents, hers is next to mine, and looked for our sunnies. I pull everything out of my backpack, search through my wardrobe, even lift up the little mattress I have there, but I can't find them. I was kind of pissed, as they were new after losing my last pair in Perth, but I went and had dinner, making a mental note to make sure I put my sunglasses somewhere specific in my bag when I did find them. The next day, I take everything out of my tent to get ready to pack up, empty my bags out, completely do all of my washing, remove the mattress and bedding, everything. No sunglasses. I repack my bags several times before leaving, and conclude that I must have lost them somewhere along the way, and I just have bad luck with them. Fast forward to a week later, and I've moved into this guy's spare room. My room is in a separate little building at the end of his garden, and I've half unpacked all of my clothes, as I usually just take them out as and when I need them. But that's when it dawned on me that coronavirus was probably going to be around for a little while longer, so I might as well get comfortable and unpack fully. My big backpack is on the floor in the middle of the room. I open it, and there, on top of all my stuff, are my sunglasses. It was as if someone had just placed them there and zipped my bag back up. I was a little freaked out, and messaged my friend, who started freaking out too. I mean, I was glad to have found them, and eventually just chalked it up to a weird experience. Then things got a little weirder. Not long after it was Easter. The guy I was staying with has a kid who he shares custody with his ex. He's a really nice kid, 7 years old, very well behaved and a lot of fun to be around. Easter morning comes around, and his dad has gone a little bit overboard with the Easter eggs, and this kid has a whole bucket load of them of all different sizes. Now this kid is great and all, but he's a little strange in the fact that he isn't really interested in chocolate. He likes it, but doesn't turn into a little sugar demon like most kids do when they have a bucket full of Easter eggs handed to them, and he's more than happy to share them with us, and isn't really fussed that much about actually eating them. He puts the bucket on his head, and we play games in the living room and have a good day together. Then after dinner, his dad tells him he can have an Easter egg for dessert if he wants. He goes to his room, then comes back to the living room looking confused, saying that all of his smaller Easter eggs have vanished. We laugh it off, saying he must have misplaced them, or that they've fallen to the bottom of the bucket. So we tip it out, and sure enough, there are only medium and large eggs in there. We search his room, under his bed and between his sheets, and there's nothing. We ask him if he's just tricking us, and he starts to get upset, insisting he has no idea why they're gone or where. Our next thought was maybe the dogs ate them, as he has 2 chocolate labs, but there's no way the dogs would have managed to eat that many without us noticing, without tipping up the bucket, and they wouldn't have specifically only chosen the smaller eggs when there were much bigger ones to eat through. Even so, we kept an eye on the dogs and an eye for any foil in their poop, but there was nothing. When this kid was at his mum's, we did a full-on search of the house, thinking maybe he was just having a laugh or had forgotten where he put them. Nothing. 20 or so small Easter eggs had just vanished. We still don't know what happened to them, and I never told the guy about my sunglasses thing in case it freaked him out. But I get the feeling the eggs will reappear soon, and questions will be raised once more. In 1978 or 79, I was working as a nurse aide. I was doing patient care as well as learning to be a medication assistant, or med aide. One day at work, I had one of my patients pass away. We have about half hour to 45 minutes to prepare the body for transportation and family. I had been working with him for almost half hour from the time he was pronounced dead. Side note, at least 3 people confirmed he had passed when I turned him from his side to his back, and he started breathing again. I stopped what I was doing and started to figure out if I was actually seeing what I thought I was seeing. He was breathing again. I reached out to check for a pulse and I found it. I can tell you at 18 that was the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. I called for my nurse because he was breathing again and she told me I was mistaken and that sometimes the body does things that make it seem that way, but that he wasn't actually alive. She walked over to him to show me and found his pulse. She told everyone that had been notified of his passing, the mortuary, his family, the facility, everyone. After we had both confirmed he was indeed alive again, she had to go call everyone back and tell them that he was alive. But he passed away for the second time 24 hours later, and he stayed dead that time. I've had a personal encounter with the paranormal. The first I remember was when I was a kid at my parents' house, maybe 10 or so. I was in the backyard with my headphones in, listening to music, most likely on my CD player, but could have been my Talk Girl. It was night, pretty dark, no streetlights in our neighborhood, but the backyard landscape lighting was on. I looked up and down the yard. By the front entrance, I saw towards the back. Along the side of the house was a woman in white walking towards me. She had that classic white ghost appearance and a flowing but fitted dress. I noped back into the house as fast as I could. Never saw her before, never saw her again, or anything over there. Years later, my parents remodeled, and half of that section of the yard was taken up by the third bay to the garage. The house was built in '38. The neighborhood was from the late 20s to late 30s, maybe early 40s. It used to be fruit orchards, no mysterious or creepy history. We have a lot of local historians in the area. The closest thing we have to a ghost story is a teen being killed with farm equipment in an accident in a back shed at his parents' house a few blocks over in 1929. No idea what I saw or why, other than I assume a figment of my overactive imagination. At another time, it was my senior year in college, and in the photo darkroom, I was working on a project late at night. I was the only one there. I probably had headphones in, as I usually did, and I was walking towards the exit to check a finished print in the light, and I looked up from my print and saw a Civil War-era looking soldier looking straight back at me. I gasped, jumped back, and after I blinked, he was gone. No one else came into the lab that night while I was there. The art building where the photo lab was, in the basement, was built in the old gardener's shed grounds. It was a residence and grounds before it became a college. I again assume it was my overactive imagination, but why it was that I have no idea. I'm not a big history buff. The prints I was working on were landscapes and it was Oregon, not what I'd think of as a Civil War hotspot exactly. I've had several of what I think were sleep paralysis episodes. Usually I would just get myself back to sleep eventually. It's always someone or something standing in the corner of the room, in the shadows or just outside the sliding glass doors, so that I can see a silhouette through the closed curtains, opaque but not light blocking. One time I did manage to break through, and subtly reached for my giant mag light that I keep by the bed, flung it and lit up the corner of the room to reveal nothing there. Then there were those fever hallucinations. Those were freaky. Home from college for spring break, ended up sick and miserable the whole week with a nasty cold and accompanying fever for good measure. One night there was a lady in white standing at the foot of my bed, totally different than the childhood one, and my bedroom is on the complete opposite side of the house as that side of the yard she was in. I remember sitting up and saying, "Mum?" thinking my mum had come in to check on me. Realized it was not Mum and panicked, but she vanished. The next night I saw my dad's severed head on the bed next to me, with a peaceful expression, no blood, just laying there. As I woke up, it gradually faded into the folds of the comforter. For my final story, My mum and I took a trip to New Orleans and had a blast. We were staying at the Le Pavilion Hotel, which has a ton of ghost stories. It was really cool and old. Our last night there, we went to bed, turned off the light beside the bed, and it was dark. A few minutes later, the lights flicked on. I wonder, half asleep, why Mum turned on the light. I didn't hear her get up or move, so she's not going to the bathroom or checking something. A minute later, it's still on. I roll over and start to ask why she turned the light on. At the same time, she rolls over and asks me why I turned the light on. We look at each other, then burst out laughing. We didn't see or hear any of the other ghosts there, but we did get our experience in before we left. The first hospital I worked at had a haunted room. It wasn't really a room, it was a larger, mini unit with 4 beds and monitors that we used as a higher acuity area. The code blue call light would go on and off when no one was in it, and biomedical had checked out several times but couldn't find anything wrong with the system, and even after replacing it completely it still happened. Equipment and people's personal items would go missing and turn up in there. Things would randomly fall over or move around. We had several patients who asked to be moved out of that room because no matter what the thermostat setting was, they complained it was freezing. But the scariest one happened to me when I had a dementia patient in that room, and while I was rounding on her, she asked me to close the door because of that scary man who keeps watching me. This happened before I was a doctor, but there was a lady on the psych ward who had really severe postpartum depression and ended up taking the life of her child. She wound up having a persistent psychotic state as a result, and subsequently was totally out of it. Some douche therapist thought that giving her a baby doll to help her grieve may fix things. Anyway, for the next few weeks she'd take care of the doll like it was real. I worked nights, and one of our responsibilities was to rotate the linens out for the patients. To do this, we had a big cabinet on wheels with locked swinging doors on the side. My buddy goes to change out the linens, and when he opens the door, the baby doll swings out, hanging by the sheet from its neck. It was easily one of the most unsettling things I'd ever seen. To set the scene, our hospital has just opened up a brand new building that our ICU theatres, radiology, ED, and 3 wards moved into only 6 months ago. I work in ED, and as part of the move, we've opened up an ESSU, Emergency Short Stay Unit, a 6-bed unit that patients who were expecting to discharge in under 24 hours but there's no point admitting under a surgical or medical team can go and stay in a ward environment until they're good to go home. Oldies that have come to us at night, that live at home alone, low-risk chest pains waiting for a 6-hour trop test, stable patients awaiting transfer to a big hospital. That's the sort of stuff we're thinking of. I've just finished a run of night shifts, and each shift the ESSU nurse has reported things out of the ordinary. The first 2 nights, it was the small unmounted whiteboard for patients' names sliding off the desk and onto the floor. The next 2 nights, another registered nurse allocated there said that one of the cardiac monitors, which have all been on standby, has just woken up on its own. Turns out that in the 6 months that we had the ESSU, we've already had a patient die there. One of the other nurses remembers running a patient from the ESSU back into resus with a Gordell's airway in, and passing away with no family members in sight. Cue X-Files theme. One Friday in September, 4 friends of mine and I were hanging out on a very foggy and mildly chilly evening with nothing to do as usual. We decided to go to the beach and have a fire. We've been going to this spot for years and knew the place pretty well. It's in a nice area and we've never really had any issues having fires there before. We arrived around 9:30 p.m. as it was getting dark, but there were still many people there hanging out by the water, fishing and having fires too. As we were choosing a spot, we noticed there was a light in the distance at the far left side of the beach. For some reason, this light, which was presumably a person, caught our eye, and we even had a short conversation discussing it. Normally, I wouldn't notice something as random as that, but for some reason I was conscious of it the entire time we were hanging around the fire. I wasn't the only one. I could see one of my friends, Mark, looking over and keeping an eye on the light as well. Again, we acknowledged it, and went on chilling as usual and trying not to think of it. About half an hour later, Mark brings our attention to the guy with the light that is now walking by us 20 meters away. But when we look over, he started walking back to his faraway spot. For reference, he was sitting at least 100 meters away from us the whole time. Since we were in a decently large group, and the fact that Mark and I had brought our knives to split wood and shave off kindling to get the fire started, we felt pretty safe. On top of that, there were still a few people around us, so none of us were too weirded out. Even though it seemed like the man was probably just fishing or something, being the paranoid person that I am, I told Mark to warn us if the light moved again, as he was the only person whose seat was facing that direction. After chatting and feeding the fire for about an hour, it was getting late. We decided to finish up the last couple of logs and call it a night. As we're talking, Mark suddenly whispers, "Why is that dude coming up to us?" We looked over, and sure enough, the man with the light was coming our way. He wasn't saying anything, just walking. I could see his pants at first. He was wearing jeans with regular work boots. "Hey," I called out to him as he was 15 meters away. He elected to ignore us, and kept walking towards us without breaking a stride. "What's up?" I say to him again. This time he responded, "Can I warm up by your fire?" While continuing to close the distance between us, considering the COVID pandemic and it being late, I decided it wouldn't be a great idea for the stranger to join us. I told him exactly that, and finally he stopped walking. He was roughly 5 meters away at this point, close enough for the fire's light to bring him into view. He was an older, raggedy-looking guy wearing a flannel jacket with a hood and hat on. As he stopped, he said, "All right, I fell in the water. I am wet." Although I could not see him very well, I could tell he wasn't wet at all. His boots were still the very light tan color that work boots are, and if they were wet, they most definitely would have been a shade darker. I continued to say no, and he finally turns around and starts walking away, frustrated, back to his spot far off in the corner of the beach, right where he claimed to have fallen in. If he was wet, why didn't he just leave? Why would he go sit back in the spot where he'd fallen in? Normally I wouldn't just leave somewhere because of something like this, but I had a really bad vibe from this guy. So we packed up our stuff, put out the fire and left. The path back to our cars had us passing over a bridge that overlooks the area of the beach the man was sitting at. We looked over, and we could see him just sitting there with the light doing nothing. On the walk back, we got more and more scared and put together the pieces of what had just happened. The man was sitting there for hours and then walked by us to check us out. He waited another hour until every single other person, including security, was gone for the beach before approaching us. Even while he was walking up to us, he didn't have any intention of saying anything before reaching us. It took me saying, "Hey," twice before he even replied. He wanted to get close enough to us without noticing, and once he realized we saw him, he made the fake excuse to try and have us let us near him. There was always the possibility that he was harmless, but I have little doubt in my mind he came with sinister intentions. He didn't look homeless, and he had no reason to talk to us and certainly wasn't wet. I'm certain we were very close to something really bad happening, and this situation really freaked me out. Who knows what would have happened if we were in a smaller group, or if he decided to keep walking towards us, or worse, if we had let him in that close to us. Always keep your guard up when you're out late, and remember guys, don't talk to strangers. The last place I worked like so many other wards here in Denmark, had a 6-hour room, where dead patients would stay for 6 hours before they checked again for signs of death, and moved to the morgue, still attached to the hospital as it's a rather big one. Not sure if this is a thing in other countries, but anyway. The patients are required to have a call line within reach in case they wake up and are in fact not dead. So there are 5 to 6 call lines in the room. Anyway, it was an ER, and we had a fair amount of dead patients wait in that room over the years. Every now and then, and usually during a night shift, the call light would go on from that room, even without any patients there. You'd have to go down and then turn them off again, and sometimes they would go on again just as you left the room. Creepy as hell. I never liked going down there alone. It felt tense, thick. Technicians came and checked the connections and stuff, but everything worked without any problems. I work in a large neonatal intensive care unit. We admit a lot of babies from our L&D and also pick up from any hospitals within a 150-mile radius. I've seen a lot of tiny babies, a lot of drug babies, and a lot of abnormalities, like babies born with their intestines outside their bodies. That being said, the worst thing I've ever seen was due to baby formula. The baby was born completely healthy. The mum was healthy. Everyone went home happy. The baby was admitted to us some time later with multiple symptoms. After some questioning, it was discovered that the mum had been feeding the baby twice the amount of formula she was supposed to. I guess she couldn't read English very well, and when she asked someone to read the instructions on the formula, they gave her the wrong amount. So every time baby was fed, they were getting double the amount of nutrients and vitamins. This caused the baby to start feeling not so great, cry more often, and every time the baby cried, the mum assumed they were hungry and would bottle feed. The cycle continued until he was admitted. At that point it was way too late, and what should have been an otherwise healthy baby ended up passing away. Listening to the mum scream and howl, crying, "I killed my baby," is something I'll never forget. I used to work for a Catholic hospital before and after it was bought by a larger healthcare system. While I didn't witness any of these things myself, I do have 2 first-hand accounts of an incident involving a nun that committed suicide. Back before I was born, the nuns were very active at the hospital. They actually started the healthcare in our area, and the hospital continued to grow. Back in the 80s or early 90s, a nun decided to jump off the building and take her own life. Obviously, this caused quite an ordeal due to the Catholic Church. A family member of mine was employed at the hospital and had a window office. She was working in her office when she saw a large black flying thing fall past her window. It was the nun. Fast forward several years later, and a supervisor on night shift was making her rounds in the hospital. She entered a long hallway with only windows on one side. The hospital itself was probably 50 to 60 feet in length, with doors on either end, but no doors opposite the windows. As she was midway down the hallway, she felt something behind her and turned around. She witnessed a nun behind her, and thinking nothing of it, simply said, "Oh, hello," before continuing down the hallway. Suddenly she stopped as the realization hit her. She realized the nun was floating. She instantly turned back around to an empty hallway. Hospital doors are very loud when you open them, and she didn't hear any doors opening, allowing anyone to leave the hallway. This hallway was just below where the nun had decided to end her life. When I first started working at the hospital, the charge nurse I made friends with on the oncology unit told me some ghost stories. One was about a little boy who died a long time ago from severe burns, when that was the pediatric ward. He said people started reporting seeing a little boy with bandages wrapped around his head, and they would die a day or two later. It sounds like a typical run-of-the-mill ghost story, until I was working on med-surg floor across the hospital one day. I had this patient whose condition was not improving, an old man with heart failure and arrhythmia. At one point during the day, I go in this man's room and he says, "Y'all need to do something about this little boy that keeps coming in here." Since I hadn't seen any kids running around, I asked him who he was talking about. He said the boy with all the bandages wrapped around his head. Needless to say, my heart sunk to my stomach, and I looked around the room, somewhat excited but scared as well, since I had never experienced anything like that. I asked him if he said anything to him, and he said that he sticks his head out the wall up there and smiles and asks if his pacemaker's working, and he pointed to the upper back corner of the room near the ceiling. Sorry to tell you guys that there was nothing there, but I can say 100% I was freaked out. He didn't see the boy again to my knowledge, but when I came back the next morning he had been transferred to the ICU overnight. And that is the only time in my life I have ever truly believed or come close to experiencing a ghost story. I worked as the unit secretary at a hospital for almost 2 years and asked to work weekend graveyards because it worked best with my school schedule. I saw a guy who got hit by a car going at 45 in a 25 while he was walking home from the library. Half of him went through the windshield before he flipped over the car and slid down the street. He was barely alive, but was a bloody pulp from his head to his stomach and his face was gone. He passed within a few minutes. I also had a guy come in that was stabbed 9 times, but was so high and drunk, all he wanted to do was to fight the cop who brought him in. He wouldn't quit yelling and spitting on him or letting anyone touch him, so they couldn't find any records or get his blood type. They finally just sedated him and stabilized him before life-flighting him to another hospital. Anytime kids or babies pass is absolutely brutal. There was an abandoned hospital near my grandma's town. It was a tuberculosis hospital, and many people died there, but the bodies were never claimed, so they were buried in unmarked graves behind the hospital. From the people I have spoken to in the town, it was a miserable place to work. Some of the staff suffered from mental illness. One of the nurses ended her own life in the isolation ward in the 50s. Shortly after that, the hospital was shut down. It would be rented out to host gatherings and events, but quickly fell apart. People reported screaming, wheelchairs moving around and doors opening and closing, as well as strange odors coming from the building. When I was younger, I remember checking it out. We didn't go inside, but we heard wheels squeaking and screaming. Keep in mind the nearest houses were kilometers away, and it was up in the hills. We always got a creepy feeling when we passed by it, like we were being watched. Then one night in the mid-2010s, the hospital mysteriously caught fire. The gas lines and powers had been disconnected since the mid-70s, and an investigation revealed that it was not caused by arson. No one knows the true cause of the fire, but the belief is that it was the work of the souls trapped inside. I want to share 2 stories that I have experienced in my life. I think it's quite interesting that it's happened twice, and I'm curious to see what you will make of it. The first time it happened to me was 2013. Long story short, my mum's best friend was diagnosed with cancer, and he was only given a few months to live. That's a bitter pill to swallow. The month of December was crazy for my mum, and it wasn't a good time in general. I was kind of young at the time, and don't remember everything, but after a night out for a family dinner on New Year's Eve, we got back home and my mum received a call saying that her friend passed away just a few hours shy of the new year. We thought it was special, and that he was ready to go, and didn't want to see the new year. The second time it happened was December 2018. This time it was my lovely grandma. In August, she was diagnosed with cancer and given 2 months to live. Somehow the months passed and December came, and she was still with us, and we cherished every moment with her. Sadly, on the 22nd of December, she made it to the hospital. I couldn't go see her until the next day. It was a lovely afternoon. I was with my brother and my boyfriend, and I was so happy to be with her. We talked a lot, and she was really tired, but she stayed awake with us. Eventually we let her sleep, said our goodbyes, and said that we would return tomorrow after work. The next day I'm going to go see her, and she's sleeping. So I called my mum and asked if I could wake her, and she said that she would be happy to see me. I tried waking her up, but I couldn't. She almost woke up, and when she did, she told me that she was tired, and that she loved me and went back to sleep. That's the last time I spoke to her, because after that she entered a coma. My mum was there almost every day, even though she was sleeping. In the night of the 30th, entering the 31st, my mum woke up and spoke to my grandma, telling her that the new year was soon, and that if she was ready to go, she could. Eventually, at 4 a.m. on the 31st, she passed, and I'm guessing she didn't want to start the new year being in that state, and she was ready. What do you all think? Uncanny coincidence? Or something more? Has anyone you've known ever passed away on New Year's Eve? I was taking care of an elderly patient. A very, very elderly patient. Actually the oldest person I've ever taken care of. I don't remember why she was admitted, but it was minor, and she was due to go home the next day. She was A&O times 3, a very sharp lady, and she and I were having a nice little chat, and I was getting ready to wrap things up when she said, "I just want you to know who that little girl is standing behind you." The hair on the back of my neck rised up. I ran through a quick assessment again. She knew which hospital she was in, yet she was seeing invisible children in her room? What? I assure her there's no one else in the room. She was very nonplussed about it. I go out to the nurse's station and have the "my patient is hallucinating ghost children, please help me" conversation with my charge nurse, and she goes, "Oh, are they in room 26? Yeah? I figured. She's the third or fourth person who we've seen witness children in that room." I worked in a super old hospital as an ICU nurse. One of the older nurses I worked with told me about a time she had a patient family request to have an exorcism for their loved one. They allowed it on night shift when less family were around. The nurse said the family and priest went into the room and shut the door. They heard screams, then a patient in another room said she saw a black figure go through her room. I used to work straight nights, and patient hallucinations are just way more eerie at night. I had a patient watch me put something in the bathroom, and he says, "There's someone behind you." I took the shower curtain and said, "It's just the curtain." And he replied, "No, behind the curtain." I got full body chills. I had another patient detoxing, and she was constantly yelling out. Well, she suddenly got quiet, so I peeked in to see if she was good. She was lying flat on her back, stiff as a board. She sat up without using her arms or anything, like something out of The Exorcist, and slowly turned to look at me. I knocked the hell out of there. Not today, Satan. Working straight nights, I've had my fair share of call lights turning on in empty rooms, radios turning on when no one's by them. Especially creepy when it happens in a room, right after the patient has passed away. I used to work night security as a patrolman in this old hospital. Our cubicle was set up outside the hospital as it was all fenced off. but it was fairly popular for people to try urban exploring within it. As you can imagine, our task was to ensure that people never got in the first place. We had a whole section of cameras in our little unit where we could see pretty much anyone coming in or out. There were some blind spots, and we were supposed to go out and walk the perimeter every hour, which we did. It would only be one of us, and of course night shift is when these people tend to come to do their exploring. The hospital itself didn't have much of interest left in it. It had been abandoned for so many years, but papers, desks, chairs, and the like still persisted within its walls. It was a damp, dusk, and humid place, pretty much one of the worst places you could possibly want to work. But fortunately for me, I only had to be in there about 10 minutes every hour. I had only been working there a few months at this point. Nothing remotely interesting had happened other than having to ferry out some teenagers who thought they'd try and smash a window. I caught them by chance walking my usual route, and instead of calling the cops, saw their terrified faces on their 15-year-old bodies and told them to just leave, and said that if they ever returned there'd be serious consequences. I never saw them again, not unless they broke in without me noticing. So as I'm doing my usual patrol, I have to go into the building. There are a couple of doors, but they're all locked, and the only one we tend to use is the main entrance. We go in, and just to the left are a set of stairs, which takes us up every part of the hospital. We have to go through and around and back to this main section to go up to the next floor, as the other stairs are locked and have stayed locked for a long time. So I'm doing the usual rounds of the 5 floors. I'm on the 3rd floor and quite bored listening to a podcast when I hear something behind me. Now, to set the scene, I have a flashlight. It's extremely dark because the windows have been partially boarded up, and any external light is only vaguely creeping through. I just about crap a brick. There should be no one in here with me, and obviously there is now, and that's fear-inducing. As I spin my flashlight round, I quickly glance, but there's no one. I turn off my podcast and keep walking around in silence. I stand there for a few minutes, seeing if I can see a light or hear someone, but when I don't, I just call out, "Security, show yourself," but there's still no one. Slightly disheartened, I tell myself that if there is someone in here, they've got no way of escaping, as I didn't lock the door as I came in, so they'd either have to knock and beg to come out, or I'll see them in the next hour. I make my rounds up to the 5th floor, and nothing's happening, but just as I make my way to the 2nd floor, and I'm descending the stairs, do I hear something on the 2nd floor as well, on the doors to the right of me, like a wind that had caused the doors to swing ever so slightly. So I peek through the glass into the gloom of the 2nd floor and see nothing, but it's my job. So I push the doors open, shine my flashlight around, and quickly peek to see if I can see anyone hidden behind some of the beds or chairs or something. But there's nothing. I do a complete sweep of the 2nd floor one more time, as there's no way if there was someone in there that had anywhere else to go, but find no one. I'm really freaking out at this point. All that I do is want to get down to my hut and just ignore the world for another hour. I start making my way back, but before I hit the door, there's a small curtain which I can hide behind, so I decide that I'm going to turn off my flashlight and hide there for a few minutes, just listening to see if there's someone there. I'm not going to lie. The moment I turned my flashlight off and felt the gloom and darkness overcome me, I genuinely felt quite scared, which is something I usually don't feel on my jobs. I waited to see if I could hear any signs of life, and after about 5 minutes of pure boredom and fear, I get up, and just as I'm about to turn my flashlight on, do I hear a giggle from behind the curtain. I instinctively punch the curtain, but it doesn't travel very far, so if there was someone behind it, they didn't get hit. I burst through it and look around the empty room. There's no one here. I do one more thorough sweep, this time believing that Satan and his minions have come to claim my soul, bricking every step, but didn't find a damn thing. I go back to my little hut and didn't work, at least not inspect the inside, for the remainder of the day. The next day, when I was speaking to my relief, I asked them if they'd seen anyone or heard anything unusual in the building, which was the first time I'd ever asked such a question. My relief asks if I'm referring to the ghost, and I casually say that I didn't know what he was talking about. He proceeds to tell me that others have reported seeing and hearing a small child within the hospital walls on different floors, that it's quite playful and excitable, and to not buy into their nonsense. I give him a hearty laugh and tell him that I agree with him, and he's on his way home. I quit shortly after that. My best friend in high school went through this stage of goth girls. I remember one night they took us haunted house exploring in the middle of the night. Now we pulled over on this random in the middle of nowhere road and crawled through this barbed wire fence by moonlight, past the fence over a small hill. I found myself looking at this 2-story and a basement farm home that was surrounded by a huge fountain. It looked like a run-down version of the home in The Great Gatsby. I wish to this day I knew how to get there. I have no idea where it was in my hometown, just that we were there and it was beautifully run down. I was not a believer in the supernatural or ghosts, so I was casually enjoying the home. Inside there were markings on the wall, knocked down doors and walls, and while you can tell it was beautiful at one time, it was really run down. I broke from the group to check out the upstairs, the basement, and the middle floor. As I was walking back to the group, I walked by the stairwell and nodded to one of the girls that was up there with us who was standing in the stairwell. As I entered the next room, I saw our entire group. I paused, then jumped back to the room with the stairwell. No one was there. While creepy, I know what I saw. I know that place has a feel to it. I wish I could find it again. I would go visit it in the dead of night, just to feel what I felt that time. A few years ago when I was 12, I was working this event called Thomas at our local train station. Before work on one of the days, me and 2 of my friends decided to explore and try and see if we could find weird stuff in the museum. Mainly, we liked looking for ghosts, the most famous being the woman in white. Apparently her life ended when someone pushed her on the tracks when a train was coming, and obviously you can imagine what happened to her. While me and my friend were looking, we come across one train car. We went in, and since it was very dark, I was forced to go first. I was the only boy, and we were walking in the car when I spotted something in the next one, which was a mail car. There was a woman in a large old-timey dress standing there. The unsettling thing was her neck at an unnatural angle. She was turned away from us, and as my friend Emma saw it, she lost it and screamed. As she was screaming, the lady turned, and her mouth unhinged, and we fled. We had one more friend at the lobby, and when we explained what happened, she wanted to take a look. Of course, when we returned, there was nothing. And as we were walking out, I look in the last car, and I think I saw some light. I got the hell out of there. I didn't want to risk it.